Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and the most powerful man in the U.S. military, the black general. He's fired. Good. Don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you. Revolutionary salute. We got to deal with this before we get into that. Be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. We won't be doing any boo-hooing and whining over here. Shoe shiners, get off y'all knees. All of the shoe shiners get complaining about racism in America. The black general, he's fired. It was a lot of other whites fired too, but y'all didn't bring that up. But let's just start with this. Let's just get into this.
The federal firings reaching top Pentagon officials overnight. President Trump firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and ABC's senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang, is in Washington following the breaking details. Selena, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, Gio. This is an unprecedented purge of military leadership. The president is firing the highest-ranking military officer in this country and other senior leaders.
See, first of all, why would he keep the man in power? The man was against him. The man didn't want him in power. Man been working against him. Very dangerous. Man might orchestrate some type of coup d'etat. Why would he want this man in power? The man not for Trump. This is the other thing they got for. He ain't for Trump. Trump don't have to keep nobody that he don't want in office. Not just this dude, people getting canned all over the country, but they want you to pay attention to this dude. Good, let's pay attention to him, because I got a lot we finna learn about what this man been doing in the military.
Shockwaves through the Pentagon. Now, the president hasn't directly said why he's firing them, but he has made it clear that he wants to get rid of anyone in the military who supports diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Overnight, President Trump firing the nation's top military leadership in an unprecedented purge. Trump ousting General C.Q. Brown as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, removing the four-star fighter pilot as America's top military leader, and firing multiple other senior leaders, including Lisa Franchetti, the first woman to serve as the Navy's top admiral, the #2 ranking general in the Air Force, and 3 other senior officers. Brown was not.
Hold on, Brown. So let's not start. Let's start. Okay, Brown, he's canned, right? Highest ranking black man in the U.S. military, he got the boot. Highest ranking lady in the U.S. military. You know, y'all heard she got the boot too. This lady was over our U.S. naval forces. Did y'all know that? This lady. And y'all want to fight Russia.
Franchetti, the first woman to serve as the Navy's top admiral, the #2 ranking general in the Air Force.
And the #2 ranking general in the Air Force. Revolutionary salute. Wow, that's pretty high up there. Hold on. I need to get my glasses. He look white. Why is Trump targeting high-ranking white men in the U.S. military? What is that called?
And 3 other senior officers. Brown was nominated by Trump in his first term, which made him the first black chief of staff for the Air Force, but has come under fire as Trump aims to rid the military of leaders who support diversity and equity, as Brown and some of the others who were fired had done. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth once called
they
Brown.
want tampons in the boys' bathroom, bro. That's the problem. They want transgender general. You heard what they just said? Trump. See, that's another thing. Trump nominated the man. Say, here, man. Yeah, we need a little reward for you. Then the man start pushing tampons in the boys' bathrooms with Jim Crow Joe and Tampon Tim. Ain't that disgusting? That's how you stab Trump in the back. You try to push for transgender generals in the U.S. military. We can't have that.
A DEI hire.
Well, first of all, you got to fire. You got to fire the chairman of Joint Chiefs.
Brown telling our chief global affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz last year he wants to be judged by his abilities.
I want to be judged based on my own accomplishments, based on my merits, and given an opportunity. That's all I've asked for throughout my, growing up. That's what I've asked for throughout my Air Force career.
See, we got to stop there because, this all he asked for was an opportunity. This guy will look at your face and say, America is not bigoted, not racist. He said they're not right for targeting transgenders and LGBTQ and all that. He's sworn to protect that type of stuff. That's what he's saying. He ain't ran across no racism in the U.S. military. This man say he ain't ran. What? Well, he ain't ran across none of that. Oh, no, not him. That's what he said. That's what he's been saying. He's been standing on that. But he want to be his merit. Okay, this dude is an Air Force pilot, right? Okay, where the hell you been earning your keep at, brother? You got a lot of medals. You in the Air Force? Oh my goodness. That's the strength of the U.S. military. They've been bombing, maiming, and murdering men, women, and children all over this globe. Where did this man get his military? Where did he get these stripes from? Huh? Was it Iraq? Was it that million? Did you help whack a million over there? Huh? Was it Afghanistan? Ooh, a bunch of villages, peaceful people died. Where was it in Syria? You've been bombing in Syria, General, killing the Christians. Was you part of the Libyan hit squad? A lot of people got put in slavery after that one. Well, where did he get these medals from?
And hopefully, I'm sitting in this chair as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs not because I'm African American, because I'm a quality officer.
That's a lot.
Trump nominating.
You know what I'm saying? You got the job because they needed to put a black face in a high place. So when Joe Biden funded neo-Nazis in Ukraine, they can say, hey, my general is black. Why would y'all say we racist?
As his replacement, Dan Kane, a retired 3-star Air Force general who has never served in a 4-star position. The shakeup comes as the Pentagon prepares to lay off 5,400 civilian workers starting next week.
Good. I heard enough. All right, because we got to get, okay. Let's see some of this man handiwork. Because this is what they ain't showing on y'all on TV. And we got time today. This why y'all make sure y'all send this to all the bootlickers talking about U.S. generals fired. Good. Nigga, you been funding Boko Haram in Africa. You busted, brother. You busted. Funded terrorists in Africa, trying to seize Africa. Now, this is some of the generals' handiwork right here. What you seeing is white pilots landing in Boko Haram in terrorist-held parts of Nigeria, giving them money, giving them weapons, giving them everything they ever needed to keep the terrorism going on. These dudes in this helicopter are contracted by the U.S. government. See that black general who was the most powerful black man in the history of military and all that type of BS, never put a stop to this. Never had nothing bad to say about this. Never looked into that. Who gives a damn about him losing? You got paid good money to run these type of operations. Yeah, he was Air Force. How many African cargo planes did he fly? Why is these CIA contractors, U.S. government, U.S. military contractors, giving these terrorists these weapons, guns, money, and all kind of shit? Why are they flying planes around Nigeria? This man who just got fired, why was he hand in glove with Boko Haram in Africa? Yes, he was. And since the white congressman in the U.S. came out and said this is the type of shit that the USAID had been doing, it's all coming out. They decided to release this a couple of days ago. The white CIA contractors, there you go. Look at the great white man. Giving them weapons, giving Boko Haram everything they need to go back and kidnap little black girls, kill more villagers, seize more oil fields and diamond mines. While that black general got paid millions of dollars to oversee these type of operations. Revolutionary salute to my brother Lunch Break Chronicles for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. He said the damn military-industrial complex. That's absolutely what it is. And that's why I'm starting this off with that black journal, because I want to let people know he part of the military-industrial complex. And we can't shed no tears about them type of bootleg individuals. Had he went down, we heard he tried to champion reparations and he tried to stand up against the real bigotry in the U.S. military. Oh, he could have been something of a hero, but he didn't. He ran operations like this, funding terrorists. The man didn't expose none of this. Anybody turn a blind eye to this, you're not no fucking revolutionary. You don't give a damn about no black people. You're just talking to try to find some dirt on Trump. Oh, look, he fired a black man. Have you looked into the black man who was fired yet? No, you haven't. You looking into his ass over here. You the head of the U.S. military. You can put it in
addition to the weekly to every 10-day shipments in cash of $40 to $80 million. Afghanistan is ruled by folks named Sarajuddin Haqqani. Haqqani network mean anything to anybody?
Now, here's a white congressman who's saying y'all been using this aid money to fund terrorists in Africa and Afghanistan and Pakistan. Why the black general didn't do that? I mean, why the black general didn't have like, you know what? I am an African American. I'm saying that's the motherland. Those are my ancestors. How can I let the U.S. military continue to fund terrorists who are killing them, stealing all their land and enslaving women and enslaving boys to be part of their child soldiers, blood diamonds? How can I support blood diamonds? The black general didn't have a conscience. He was willing to do this till he turned 70. But Trump said, oh, no, you won't. Take your little pension and get the hell out of here.
Buddy in the room, how about Abdullah bin Laden, who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Because your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding. If you think that the program under Operation Enduring Sentinel entitled Women's Scholarship Endowment, which receives $60 million annually, or the Young Women Lead, which gets about $5 million annually, is going to women who, by the way, if you read the Inspector General's report, is telling you that the Taliban does not allow women to speak in public. Yet somehow you're believing, and American people are supposed to believe, that this money is going for the betterment of the women in Afghanistan. It is not. You are funding terrorism, and it's coming through USAID. And it's not just Afghanistan.
On the BHT, on the ideologies,
there was the issue of the NGOs. Yes.
NGOs, there are so many things.
This is well life. Appreciate my brother Warren Will for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is real life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. I did just get that from the first show started. Want to show that love to you. Salute to you. Been a member for 5 months. You say Core Figure TV News is always on everything. Revolution is definitely a way of life. Salute to you, family. Well, this is the head of the Nigerian military. This guy right here. He just was denied a visa from entering Canada last week, going to a military expose where a lot of top military generals was going to be there. That's a backhand to Nigeria, and they pissed. But he's going to do a lot of exposing right here. The gig is up. But they tell us about a black general being fired. Black general, why you didn't look out for your fellow black general and tell Canada, why you being racist and treating this man like nothing? All because he's mad because y'all funding terrorism. But the black general in America didn't see this man as his black brother. Oh, no. He seen this man as a some type of peasant in Nigeria who got to do what they say, or El Shabaab might cut his head off. Disgusting. That's why you expose him.
If we want to go into NGO issues, there's so many things I had. Initially, when the NGOs came in, when we started, they didn't want any oversight function. They didn't want us to know where they were going to. We had issues with that because now they will go into the enclave of the terrorists and go and treat them. You are treating the same people that is attacking the communities. You tell them, no, that you are neutral. How neutral can you be? We've had situations where allegations of arms, them conveying arms to us just to make sure that the war continues.
Okay. Now,
we've had situations where
what he said, they always want to go into the enclaves of the terrorists. I already told you that. They've been exposed. They always want to, they say they want to take humanitarian aid to wherever terrorists is at, saying, hey, it's women and children that got to be fed. But guess what? They're taking weapons and money and communications and night vision goggles and airlifting, airdropping drones and all that type of stuff and taking fighters. This is what they've been doing the whole time. They've been exposed. But the general, the head of the Nigerian army is telling you this, that in order for them to get aid, they got to let these humanitarians do whatever they want. You can't be in their business. You can't search. You don't search anything now. That's a violation of the U.S. Code of Customs. You can't be touching on these. This is disgusting and imperialistic. Why the hell was the black general going along with this? I mean, he didn't say, hey, as a black man, I can't see y'all treat other black people like this. I know what y'all did to Africa. I know what you done did all these years of slavery. Hell no, he didn't say none of that. Why are people telling me to shed a tear for a nigga who went along with white supremacy his goddamn self? This Cofigure TV, we don't care about shoe shines.
Well, they will tell you they are taking food to communities. Halfway, to tell you the trailer has broken down. By next morning, the trailer is empty. And that vehicle that is broken down, the driver will just go and drive it and take it back. So what had happened? You have funded those guys. You are taking care of them equally. We've had several situations like that. So we said, no, it can't continue like that. And that's why we insisted with the state government that, look, the state government must know what's going on. So if any NGO comes, it must be registered. We must monitor what's going on. We've had situations where NGOs will come in with unidentified individuals entering communities. You don't even know what they're doing. They don't have NGO ID cards. They are not part of the government. Who is taking them to? What are they going there for? And so by the time we start monitoring what they were doing, we noticed things started getting better. So which means something is going on somewhere. Because they come from all over the world and you don't know who is who. So that's why for every country, please regulate what the NGOs are doing, monitor what they're doing. Most times you hear them telling you that they spent $10 million and then you wonder where. Most times the money is spent on themselves, on their luxuries. The hotels they stay, the vehicles they are using, and all those things. The locals don't benefit much from them. And yet this thing keeps on. I've told you, somebody will come and pay for a house for 10 years ahead. So what is he trying to tell you? This thing will never end until after 10 years, or maybe he will renew it. And again, I always remember that if there is peace and the threat level is low, one, they are going to retrench them. Two, their hazard allowance will reduce. How many of them will want that? We're not saying all of them are bad. No, some are really doing very well. Some are extremely doing very well. But again, please don't just assume they're just monitor what's going on, monitor what's being spent. I think it's important. I think we've dealt with the issue.
There's the last one of extermination of the.
When is it going to end? Maybe I should ask you, when is criminality going to end? It's something that we have to live. No, the truth about it is just something that's the new world order. And it's everywhere. In America, how many killings are going on? It's all acts of terrorism. It's going to be in every country. It is your ability to mitigate, to deal with it in such a way that it does not affect the normal lives of the people. But acts of criminality will continue. That is for sure. Countries that have not had this, please don't allow it to start. Whatever it takes, once they start, please nip it immediately in the bud. It's very important. And what does it take? Monitoring. Monitoring is good. Law enforcement, legal system. These are areas that we are having a lot of challenges. Most times you even arrest these people, there's no legal law to deal with them. You are left with the people to deal with. It's a big issue. And because they know that, they too will leverage on those aspects. So I think that's why it's important. Like we said, is the whole of society approach to addressing asymmetric warfare. Thank you. Thank you. They don't speak your language. You brought them across from international borders. You give them refuge. They stayed with you. They had a sharing formula for them to be with you. And then suddenly you stop giving them what they wanted. The tendency is next, they want to start asking by force. That was exactly what happened with the Lakrawas. They are from Niger. They don't even speak Nigerian language. They are not Nigerians at all. But the locals felt comfortable with them, thinking that they are one of the same. Maybe my religion, come here and help me. In case I'm going to be attacked, you can protect me. then I'll be giving you this amount of money or giving you this support and all these things. And in fact, some of them, if you talk to them, the communities now, they tell you, no, they are very friendly. Because what they do is that they try to show you they're better opponents to the government. They bring out money, pay you money, give you food, give you this. Say, no, I'm with you. I'm here to protect you. Better than your government. But you know, it doesn't last. The romance doesn't last. After a while, they will show their true colors. And that's exactly what they did. Initially, again, when they came, they said they didn't have anything to do with Nigeria, that their problem was with Niger. So they were comfortable. And since their problem was with Niger, the locals felt comfortable with them. And when you come to ask them and say, no, there's nobody, we're all friends, they're all, because we share a very common border, like I said, with Niger, about 1,600 kilometers. Some houses, you see the sitting room is in Nigeria, the bedroom is in Niger. That is how close. We share common culture, tradition, religion together. So it makes it difficult even separating them. So even when you come as a visitor and you want to find out, they tell you, no, we're together, there's no problem. Until they started taxing them and they started killing them. That's when they now cried out. So efforts are being made now. Operations are ongoing to clear them up completely from the sovereign. And we're working together with Niger. Because normally, like I said, they don't respect any border. You come here, they move to the next country. And then when you leave, they come back. Now, we have 20 kilometers right of pursuit. The Nigerians are working together with us. So we're addressing the gradual. But like I said, it's a difficult operation because the only way you identify them is if you see them armed. Or else they're just like any other person. So if the villagers tell you they are our friends or they are our relations, what do? That's the difficulty in asymmetric warfare. But we're working on it. And then the intelligence agencies are equally down there following up the issue. On the issue of the IDPs and probably refugees, yes, psychological operations have been, we have psychologists. In the military, we have, like everything, every space of life you have in the civil, we have in the military. It's just like in the civil, probably more, but in the military, small, but very, very efficient. So even for our troops, because of post-traumatic stress disorder, we have for our troops, when they are, before they go, we brief them. When they are leaving the theater, we also take them back and give them some psychological, because we don't want them to go back with that mindset back to the community. Sometimes they go back with a lot of rage because of what they've seen, what they've gone through. So we do that. Likewise, part of the de-radicalization program we're doing is we have the psychologists to also take part, apart from the religious leaders, because it's a holistic thing, and we know the importance of mental health issues again, and so those are the things that have been addressed quite very well. On the issue of the ratio of non-kinetics, well, the ratio, maybe you look at it from the level that at least now the rates of attacks have gone down. Communities are now resuming back to their communities, and not forcefully, like with the question from the IGP. Not at all. The communities, in fact, most communities are eager to return back to their villages. So one thing is that we must give the clear, working together with the government until we are sure that there is, because normally before they go back, we go back there with the government officials to ensure that infrastructure, at least to some level, is restored. There is water, some semblance of life before they are. And then we also, because of the use of IEDs, one of the greatest challenges we are having in the terror is the use of IEDs. So they are scattered all over. And probably some ammunitions too that were there that were not exploded. So we make sure that we go around, cleared all these areas, make sure that it's safe, and then with their own consent, they are transported back to these communities. There's no community in the world that is 100% free. So if we say we're looking for an ideal situation where it is no community is 100% free, but we make sure that at least to that extent that they are able to go back. And we've returned. Baga is fully back, Gudumbali is back, Kukawa is back. So we are taking them in gradually, steps by step, and we feel that's the best thing to do. Because again, leaving them in IDP camps, you are creating another problem. Now you're having a lot of rape cases, a lot of stealing, a lot of killings, all within the camps because they're so crowded. So easing them out gradually and taking them back to their communities has made it a lot easier. But again, with their consent, nobody's been forced into doing it. And then for the refugees, we're also working with, we have some of them in Niger, some in Cameroon, some in Chad. We're also working with them to bring them back gradually. And so I think the work is going on, and we will continue to do that. We believe the non-kinetic has a major role in what we're doing. The military, like I said, can only do so much. the government must be there to be held to account.
Have to answer. You see, since they have the idea of this firepower, bandits use AK-47. Well, the law of the land did not allow somebody that is not trained as a military or as a police officer to hold AK-47. And this is a community-driven crisis that can be addressed substantially by the members of the communities. In as much as the communities are trained and they know the enclaves of the bandit, and they don't have the power because they can only use pump action that ranges only 100 meters. Well, bandits are having AK-47 that has a range of about 400 meters. They will continue to deal with people even if people want to fight and protect their communities. What government is doing to address that problem, considering the fact that in the Boko Haram, hunters were given AK-47, and that's what honestly helped in addressing the problem of Boko Haram. So what is government doing now to make people to have access to that more advanced and more sophisticated weaponry so that we will come to we will completely dislodge this bandit? Because in as much as we leave them, they will continue to expand, and that is a serious issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Has been inadvertently funding terrorist organizations, including Boko Haram, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda. During a recent subcommittee hearing, Perry claimed that approximately $697 million annually.
Now, the question I'm presenting to the community is, why should we give a damn about this bootlicker being fired when you've been funding Boko Haram and they've been enslaving young black girls all throughout Africa, kidnapping young black boys? Why should we give a damn? Why should we care? You ain't did nothing. Just, we know you sided with the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That's a sin and that's treason against our people. But you're busted. The head of the U.S. military, the black dude, you're busted funding Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda. That's all Nigeria is talking about. This man can't walk away from it. He was part of that. He wasn't the dude who put the plan together, but he ran the operations as the head of the fucking U.S. military.
Intended for developmental aid has been misappropriated to support these groups. He highlighted instances where funds earmarked for constructing schools in Pakistan showed zero evidence of completion, raising concerns, serious concerns about oversight and accountability within USAID. And now to join us to discuss this further, we're joined by investigative journalist David Hundeyin, who has delved deeper into these allegations, uncovering a complex web of financial mismanagement and corruption. His research suggests that significant sums reportedly allocated for educational and humanitarian projects have been siphoned off, potentially fueling instability and violence in regions like Nigeria. Today's findings have ignited debates about the role of international aid agencies and the unintended consequences of their operations in conflict zones.
Justice Judith says, joining us to discuss these pressing issues, David Hundeyin, the investigative journalist who brought these allegations to light, and Awal Rafsanjani, executive director of the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center. Welcome to the program, guys. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good. And Rafsanjani is with us as well, I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Grand, okay. Now, David, let's start with you. Could you first provide an overview of your investigation into USAID's alleged funding misappropriations and how you uncovered all of this?
So I wouldn't go as far as to call it an investigation. It's just sort of some basic fact checking that I did shortly after the initial set of allegations were made. by the U.S. Department of Government Efficiency about financial malfeasance at USAID. I went to the U.S. government platform where you can actually verify what payments are going in and coming out. It's a U.S. Treasury platform. And I paid a special focus to USAID Nigeria, because obviously Nigeria is my key focus is on. And what I noticed, so there were two major things that I noticed. I noticed, first of all, in the lead up to Donald Trump's inauguration, obviously Donald Trump had made it very clear prior to becoming president that one of his priorities would be to slash the foreign aid budget. In the lead up to Donald Trump's inauguration, there were several of these like unexplained, significantly large payments that were made to this sort of very nondescript organizations. And then after, I believe it was on January 28th, Donald Trump made he issued the executive order freezing all payments from USAID. And what I noticed with USAID Nigeria is that on January 29 and on January 30, which is the day after and 2 days after the direct instruction of the US president was made, a total of about $466,000 were sent out to recipients by USAID Nigeria. And even worse, the recipients were marked as miscellaneous and undisclosed. So when you have close to $500,000, so $466,000 for reference, that's something in the region of 700 million naira, or just under 700 million naira, basically disappearing into a black hole after the US president gave the direct instruction that there had to be no further payments to anybody. 700 million naira is a lot of money in Nigeria. That's a lot of money to just disappear into nothingness. So where is that money going? And this has been a key recurring theme, that a lot of these sort of humanitarian or this sort of nondescript foreign missions that purport to do something in Nigeria and other parts of Africa, it has long been an accusation leveled at them that these people are, in fact, one of the key reasons why there's a lot of instability. There's terrorism and there's rebel groups and whatnot across Africa. Because if you think about it, where on earth are these groups getting their support from? The context here is that Africa is in terms of economic output, is the world's poorest continent. It has the world's leanest economies. It has the world's poorest people. There is very little to fight over in terms of the actual size of the economy that exists in Africa. And yet, every 10 minutes, there's a new armed group rising out of the dust, out of the woodwork, for no reason in particular. So in the last 6 months alone, even just in Nigeria, we've seen a new one to add to the plethora of the ones that we have Boko Haram, we have AQIM, we have ISWAP, we have a new one, Lakurawas. It's the same story across the Sahel. It's the same story in East Africa. There's always some M23. There's always a new group coming out of the woodwork to fight over the nothing that we have. And these new groups are always very suspiciously well-armed, well-funded. They have incredible logistical support networks. If you recall, there was a time when Boko Haram was actually physically holding territory, and the Nigerian military could not enter. Something similar happened in Mali, where there was a period where fully half, or more than half of Mali's territory was being held by these, Islamists in the Sahel. So where on earth does it happen that these sort of, flip-flop wearing semi-literate people suddenly get such logistical capacity and such training to be able to go toe-to-toe with battle-hardened national militaries? For all of the Nigerian military's failings, the Nigerian military is actually one of the most engaged militaries in Africa. They're quite battle-hardened. So how is it possible that these groups come up out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they can go toe-to-toe? They have equipment that the Nigerian military doesn't have. More recently, we've seen reports that they have drones. They have military drones. For reference, even the type of connection you need to run a military drone, it's not a mobile internet connection you used to do it. It's not Airtel or MTN that you used to use. You need a satellite connection for that. So how are separatist groups in Sahel having access to satellite connection? Where is this? This is a very expensive endeavor. So where exactly is that money coming from? And I think we're starting to see the answer now. That it's no longer just an accusation. It's no longer just circumstantial. That a U.S. congressman has basically come out and said it, and he's fighting documents that basically
it's given more credit to the entire situation, hasn't it?
Yes, indeed. I mean, let's come to you a while. I mean, from a civil society perspective, what are the implications of these allegations for Nigeria's security as well as trust in international aid?
Mr. Rafsanjani?
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Rafsanjani, that was directed to you.
Okay. Yeah, well, for us, we are not surprised. This is something that has been going on over, decades. Some countries that they regard themselves as powerful and that they must control the economic and political space in Africa, they have deployed strategy this time around not to do direct colonialism, but to do it indirectly by sponsoring this kind of not only faceless but even very faceless groups to sustain their control and their influence, while the citizens suffer from the violence attack from these terror groups, which they actually formed and sponsored. At the same time, they will be siphoning the resources of these countries. And that's exactly what we have been witnessing over the years in many of the African countries where you will have incidents of terror groups. There's a history behind this sponsorship or this exposure that the congressman in America had made. As a matter of fact, it's not a hidden secret that the State Department actually is, responsible for many of these groups that emerge. For example, if you look at the terror groups in Al-Qaeda, for example, Al-Qaeda was funded and formed by the allegedly by the State Department. You remember Osama bin Laden was actually trained and sponsored by the State Department. It was only when they began to disagree that they now call them terrorists or they now call them terror. So I think if you look at various groups that the West support to carry out arms, they are actually highly funded by these Western countries simply because they want to have control of their economy. They want to make sure that they continue to extend their colonialism, through the use of terror groups. So we are not surprised as civil society that this, exposure, was confirmed by a congressman in America. But what actually surprised us was the fact that the Nigerian military or the Nigerian authority, despite the intelligence that they have, they could not be able to know this and then be able to even rise up and demand for the continuation of this sponsorship of terror group. So apparently, the Nigerian military, they were just enjoying spending trillions of naira in the names of buying arms and ammunition, which we did not even see it in terms of safety and protection of the citizens.
Okay, then, Mr. Rafsanjani.
For me, I'm not really surprised as a civil society. I'm not surprised. It is something that we know has been going on. Only that our own government have not been proactive to ensure that they raise the necessary concern over it.
Well, Mr. Rafsanjani, the next question is how pervasive is this corruption and in what direction is it coming from? Are we saying that, well, organizations like USAID are the corrupt ones, or does it become corrupt after they've handed it over to authorities here in Nigeria? Where does the corruption start? Are they aware that they are funding insurgency, or is it taken over from the Nigerian side once these funds are made available to the agencies here in Nigeria?
So I'm not sure if it is the USAID funding, but rather the State Department, because the USAID, most of its funding, you could see that it is more of like a development project, not really, working directly, between government to government. It is very important to note that this kind of funding, is directly from the State Department, not from necessarily USAID. USAID focuses more on issues around health, around education, around maybe other issues that has to do with the community support. But the major project like sponsoring terror groups, I think it doesn't come from the USAID funding, but rather from the State Department, or from any relevant American institutions that they do that. And for me, the congressman is making this statement maybe because they really needed to justify why USAID has to be scrapped. Otherwise, for the past 10 years, he has been in the US Congress and he hadn't raised this. So for me, actually, is even though he has actually said the truth that they are the one sponsoring terror group, but
that's a big scandal.
He could have made this in, when 10 years back when he has been in the Congress. So he has not made that, this linking it to USAID. For me, I do not think that it is well, funded with the facts and evidence, but rather.
This is an outrageous scandal. We've been knowing the U.S. was sponsoring terrorism, but it's all laid out in court documents now, and they filed their taxes sponsoring terrorism. That's the craziest part. They filed their taxes. The U.S. government kept all the books. They had to, make sure the paperwork was there. Funding terrorists. Terrorists are slavers. Where you have slavery in the world right now is where the terrorists are at. So that's disgusting why the people keep talking about this damn black general that was fired. This nigga was over slavery. Ain't no other way getting around it. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, they raid villages, kidnap women as their sex slaves, kidnap boys as their child soldiers. Slavery is going on. We've seen them in Libya selling black migrants like the old days of the Arab slave trade. Come on now. That's disgusting. That's exactly what they was doing.
That maybe funding from the State Department or from directly other US, related funding. Nigeria and the United States of America have what they call bilateral. So there's bilateral relation that supports Nigeria with, either weapons or training or intelligence. So I think invariably, I believe that it is because the Nigeria is also sleeping. That is why we have experienced this kind of thing without being noted or without being, action being taken. I think, it is a clerical call for the Nigerian government to be more serious about, how they engage with the multinational, cooperation or diplomatic relation that they have.
All right.
We have submitted ourselves to like a second-hand citizens.
All right. Well, Mr. Rafsanjani, we are aware that you're in transit, so we'll let you go now, but thank you very much for your contribution here this morning. We'll continue with David Hundeyin.
Yes, David. You just listened to Mr. Wild's submission there regarding mechanisms and just basically how whether or not, whether the funds are being misappropriated or diverted. One thing is certain, we also bear the brunt of the blame when it comes to their meddling with our affairs. Do you agree with Mr. Rafsanjani?
I agree with him partially. I agree with him in the sense that the State Department obviously plays a leading role in directing and coordinating the sort of strategic stabilization of African countries, including Nigeria. Where I absolutely and totally disagree with him is the idea that USAID is somehow innocent in all of this. Obviously, he comes from the civil society space in Nigeria, which is largely funded by USAID and its affiliates. So I can understand why maybe out of some sense of solidarity, he doesn't want to sort of throw his colleagues under the bus. However, if you've been following the story and if you've been following the characters involved in the story, it's very clear that USAID has at least as much involvement as the State Department does. Because how this works is that unlike the State Department, which is obviously subject to Congress, or the CIA, which is subject to the president, CIA needs approval from the president to carry out any operation. USAID was not established by an act of Congress and doesn't need permission from the president. So it's basically a law unto itself. And the budget for USAID is more than that of the CIA and the State Department together. It's between $40 and $50 billion annually. So essentially, the USAID functions as the sort of slush fund of the US intelligence community. This has been very well established if you've been following figures like Mike Pence, who has been doing a lot of great expository work about this. He used to work at the State Department. So basically, the USAID is the big slush fund. And how money is moved to terrorists or separatists or whatever is that it's done in plain sight, right? Unlike maybe the CIA or the State Department who do covert things, but they do it directly. What USAID will do is that they will say that they're funding some organization that I don't know, feeds hungry children somewhere in northern Nigeria, and they'll fund it with $10 million. And when you go onto the ground, you realize that if not even a fraction of that money made it there, right? But where that money actually made it to was the bad actors in question. That is how, that is the true extent of USAID involvement in this story. And that's not my opinion. That's what the Americans themselves are revealing. Obviously, this is happening because of a political dispute in Washington, D.C. The current occupants are trying to purge the influence of the previous occupants, which is why everybody's bringing out everybody's secrets now. It's not as if they didn't know this before. So obviously, we know that they're not doing this out of the sincerity of their hearts or because anybody has any interest in fighting terrorism or whatnot. We know they're doing it just to discredit the Democrats. But at the end of the day, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, right? If something which, I mean, as at 2009, we were not visually familiar with the concept of terror as a Nigerian thing. Terrorism didn't exist in 2009. And just,
do you hear that? Do you hear what he just said? I keep telling people the CIA brought terrorism to Africa. It was Bin Laden was already bringing some terrorism to Sudan, I think it was. But the terrorism exploded in 2009. But when they killed Gaddafi, what was that, 2011? That's when the terrorism exploded. All the terrorists got super weapons and super funding, and then they sent them throughout Africa.
Just 4 years later, by 2013, terrorism was an everyday headline in Nigeria. We've been very harshly, very rudely, and very violently brought into this world that we're not familiar with. And that has happened through the actions of American administrations, primarily Democrats. So if it happens that you then have this sort of...
Primarily Democrats. That's crazy, but so goddamn true. Like the Democratic general who just was fired as the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. Yes, on his resume is he supported terrorism and slavery and child sex trafficking and child soldiers, blood diamonds, all that type of shit in Africa. That's on the record. That's a fact, Jack. He was the head of it. I don't want to hear shit about no fucking racism. He don't give a damn about no black people. You sold them into slavery when you funded terrorists in Africa. They might not want to talk about this on the news, but they'll talk about it everywhere else. This is his resume. So all them boule channels talking about trouble, racist, and bigot, man, nobody give a damn about that slave trade in general. Who was funding terrorism?
Wrecking ball sort of administration in power now that is not even Republican in a conventional sense. Basically just want to burn everything down, out of some sense of vengeance or whatever. You should take it because that's in our favor, right? If our
Obama was for it. The congressional black bootlickers, you heard that brother say the Democrats, shamefully, that's their shame, y'all. They're con artists who don't give a shit about black people. Talk about racist. People don't give a damn about no motherfucking black people. They don't. That's a big scam. Hell of a one they've been running. They all multi-millionaires in the congressional black caucus full of millionaires. Who who fund slave traders and who fund neo-Nazis. That's a fact.
Our problem, or one of our biggest problems, is that we have this huge 800-pound gorilla that is sponsoring instability in our region and making it impossible for us to grow. And now that gorilla is having internal issues and all these things are becoming exposed. That gives us a window of opportunity to do what needs to be done. So I completely disagree with Mr. Rafsanjani in his attempt to sort of extricate USAID from this issue, because USAID is front and center.
David, isn't that kind of justified when you think about the jobs that is created? I mean, with its good comes its bad as well, but there's been some level of good to it. And those are people's jobs and livelihoods. You know, there's CSOs who's benefited from USAIDs, there are people who have been employed under this scheme, you know, and I mean, if he tries to extricate himself, doesn't he have the right to do that?
Well, if USAID is responsible for funding, for creating the instability in the first place, and then they are sort of treating the symptoms, you know, or making some cursory, you know, pretense at treating the symptoms, but they are the ones who are behind it in the first place, then they are not, their presence is not helping. If I stick a needle into your neck and I'm siphoning off your blood, right, and you're slowly dying, and then at the same time, I'm feeding you vitamins and nutrients and fruits so that you stay alive and keep producing blood, right? I can claim that I'm the one keeping you alive because I'm feeding you, but I'm also the one killing you. So the solution is not for me, is not for the status quo to remain. The solution is for me to take the needle out so that whether I'm feeding you or not makes no difference to you. That's what USAID needs to do in Nigeria. They need to leave us alone.
All right, now, David.
And we will sort out whatever issues that we have.
David, let's look at the why. In your submission, you use very interesting words that I found very interesting. By the way, don't look at a gift horse in the mouth. Totally describes the situation. However, you mentioned nondescript organizations here in Nigeria that have perhaps maybe received certain funds from these agencies outside of the country, in this case, USAID. You spoke of $700 million, is it dollars or naira, that vanished into thin air? And I think the word you used was strategic destabilization. Why exactly would they want to destabilize the Nigerian economy? What are we giving back to them? What are they gaining from us being destabilized?
So again, you don't have to take my word for it, because I realize that when I say these things, a lot of the time it sounds like these are my theories. So I think people need to, for example, read up on the so-called Kissinger report or the Kissinger doctrine, which is still available online. This was basically the background for American foreign policy for Africa, which was formulated sometime in the 1970s when Henry Kissinger was U.S. Secretary of State. And it still forms the basis for U.S. policy, for U.S. foreign policy on Africa. It has not changed since then. So you can read that document. You can also read up on, I believe the fellow that I referenced earlier, Mike Pence, who used to work at the State Department. There's a good video series he's been putting out recently. In one of those videos, he talked about a CIA training manual, which came across, and he actually put up the manual. You can actually download it, where a fictional West African country called Nairobi, whose capital is called Ajuba. Draw your conclusions from that. And it's basically a trading manual for how the CIA could hypothetically stage a crisis in that country for the sole purpose of disrupting the construction of Chinese infrastructure. Because the idea is that continued construction of Chinese-funded infrastructure draws that big West African country into the economic and political ambit of China and reduces American influence in the region. It's very important for people to understand how the U.S. foreign policy establishment sees the world. It does not see the world as a place where human beings live, and this is where your children are living and dying. This is where your hopes and dreams exist. It sees the world primarily in terms of resource potential and in terms of who is friendly and who is hostile, who is useful and who is not. All right. So according to this Kissinger doctrine, it forms the basis for U.S. foreign policy on Africa. Africa has a very specific role in global economy and geopolitics. The economic role is that it's to be the place where you get cheap industrial inputs. So that's cheap cash crops, cheap energy reserves like crude oil, uranium, whatnot, cheap solid minerals, and it's also to be a place where you get cheap human labor if it's needed.
So David,
So nowhere in that doctrine is there a space for an Africa which has a large population that uses its own resources, that has an industrial economy, and that exists at the same level as maybe North America, Europe, and Asia. There's no space for that in that US foreign policy doctrine. So it therefore follows logically that if you are the foreign policy establishment in charge of executing that doctrine, your key focus will be to ensure that that part of the world that is meant to remain the place with hewers of wood and drawers of water cannot be stable. Those people cannot have 10 uninterrupted years of peace.
So who do we have to thank for this? I asked that first, then I'm going to apply this. In his first term, Donald J. Trump was seen as a tyrant, was seen as, not really, he was seen as a villain by most of Africa. Now, if we have these events unfolding and we have us in Nigeria here looking for accountability, are we now changing his status from villain to hero? Does he mean well for Africa? Is that why he is cutting these agencies and cutting these fundings to help us, perhaps, do you think?
No, he absolutely does not mean well for Africa. But as I said, he has an agenda which happens to align with that of Africa. I don't think Donald Trump can place most African countries on the map. He probably thinks we're all a bunch of resource monkeys on this continent, to be honest. However, it just so happens that as a result of the manner in which he was forced out of office last time, he believes the election was stolen from him. And also as a result of what was done to him during the 4 years where he was out of power. People often forget he was dragged through several court processes and legal processes. He had the police mugshot. Right? To the best of my knowledge, he is the first US president in the modern era to have a police mugshot taken of him. Right? And then he also believes that they tried to kill him twice, which, I mean, you do have to say it is quite curious that someone that heavily guarded, some untrained kid somewhere was able to put a bullet within a few centimeters of his head. So he believes that this deep state, this secret state, right, which is the same as this foreign policy establishment in the US, he believes that they are his enemy. So which is why they have been his key focus. All of the key institutions in that deep state, he has gone after all of them. He's gone after the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, which is the main vehicle for foreign regime change operations. He's gone after USAID, which is basically the piggy bank for all these operations that happen, with or without presidential approval. He's gone after, there was this other major one he went after. He's put Marco Rubio in charge of the State Department, which is going to severely whittle the amount of influence that he has. And he's basically cut funding. The reason he's so specific about cutting funding is not really because he cares about efficiency and whatnot. To be honest, the foreign policy budget of the US is 1% of the federal budget. It's not that much money in American terms. The reason he's going after it so specifically is that he's trying to defund the people he thinks are his enemies. And that just so happens to align spectacularly with what we need from US foreign policy. So which is why I said we should see it as an opportunity and don't look a gift horse in the mouth. It doesn't mean Donald Trump is a good person. It doesn't mean he's a hero. It doesn't mean he likes Africa. He definitely doesn't. But we'll take it.
Right. David, I have to ask you, in all of this, there's one thing, there's an element that I think that we need to, try to focus on, and that's Nigeria and our lack of intelligence or the presence of none, or if there is in any sense, because this has been going on since 2014 or thereabout, and the terrorism group have metamorphosed over the years to what we now see it as Rawa, right? And so it begs to ask the question how this funding have slipped under the radar, that from one administration to another and now the third have not been able to flag this, and our the head of defense, chief of defense staff, plus all the chief heads and the national security advisor have not been able to flag this, or the individuals who are in cahoots with USAID to have gotten to this point.
So I just want to correct the impression that the Nigerian intelligence infrastructure and the security establishment is not aware, or they've not been aware. They have been aware for at least 10 years. Money cannot come into Nigeria or flow within Nigeria, and they don't know. They do know. The problem is that the sheer quantum of money that is involved here makes it very easy in the Nigerian context for people to have their loyalties tested and for people to look the other way when they really shouldn't. That is the key problem. And I can say this authoritatively because based on my own interactions with people in that space, and also based on my interactions with people in the civil society space, I know for a fact that none of this is news to many actors in those spaces. They are very well aware of what is happening and the role that they are deliberately or inadvertently playing. But what you will hear from them is, at the end of the day, man must jump. Mm-hmm. That's I think the tragedy of the Nigerian condition, where you know that something is being done to you and to your people, and you know that hundreds of thousands of people are dying as a result of this thing that is being done. But all you can see is what little localized benefits you are getting out of it. So because you get to drive a nice car, you get to live in a nice part of town in Abuja, you get to travel the world, and you get to have this little, petite bourgeoisie lifestyle. That is worth hundreds of thousands of people in the Northeast dying anonymously, just so that you can have this little pretense of comfort, while the country continues to implode around you, and while the inflation keeps inching and creeping closer to you, while you cover your eyes and pretend that it's not happening. That is the case with the CSO establishment. That's the case with the security establishment. That's especially the case with the intelligence establishment, which is, they know this in greater detail than any of us who is speaking here does. They do. They just can't, they just refuse to act on it because everybody has a vested interest here or there, and it's very unfortunate.
Right. Very unfortunate indeed. And just finally, before I let you go, right, what particularly were like the red flags or patterns that sort of points to, that we have overlooked for too long? Some red flag or pattern that, in your course of just, looking at this and just seeing how this has played out and just being very invested in this situation, what were some patterns and red flags that even the ordinary Nigerian or even the media just didn't see?
So let me read out a portion from, this was part of a USAID budget, I believe, from 2023. And these are just some random line items, just to create some context. So $10 million for voluntary medical male circumcision in Mozambique. $9.7 million for University College Berkeley, California, to develop a cohort of Cambodian youth with enterprise-driven skills. $2.3 million for strengthening independent voices in Cambodia. $14 million for gender equality and women empowerment hub. $14 million for improving public procurement in Serbia. $486 million to the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strength. So these are all line items that mean absolutely nothing. These are extremely vague descriptions that do not give you any information about where this money is going, who it is going to, and what it is going to be used for. These are big descriptions. So if you were a banker and you were seeing transfers in these sums, and these were the descriptions, as a compliance officer in a bank, you will not be doing your job if you didn't flag these, because these have all sorts of money laundering red flags, right? So right. If your job was to counter money laundering and terror financing, these are the things that you would look at. However, because it's coming from a US government institution, you convince yourself that you have to look the other way, and obviously you may also have some vested interest. So I think that's what has been happening, because right. The red flags have been there in plain sight. This is money laundering on an epic scale, right? Because Nigeria is mentioned in that budget too, and you have hundreds of millions of dollars in 2023, for example. Supposedly, USAID spent $823 million in Nigeria. On what?
David,
we actually don't know.
David, hang on a second. Where does the responsibility lie? Does it lie with USAID to actually check on where the monies are going, or the Nigerian authorities to see where they might be spent at? Where does it lie exactly? Who's to blame when it comes to these monies disappearing? Who didn't do their due diligence to follow the trail?
It's definitely the Nigerian government's responsibility, because again, it's not a case of USAID making a mistake or just money just innocently going missing. These are bad actors. These are things that are deliberately done intentionally to conceal bad faith action. So it's the responsibility of the victim to ensure that they are not victimized. So it's the Nigerian government's responsibility to ensure that Nigerian lives and hopes and dreams are protected in a world where some people have written a foreign policy doctrine somewhere that Africans are supposed to be poor and miserable, and that we're not supposed to, our population is not supposed to thrive, right? It's the Nigerian government's responsibility as the government of the most populous African nation in existence to ensure that through its own enforcement and monitoring actions, it makes it impossible for anybody who has such views to actually actualize them on the ground. So ultimately, that's where the buck stops. The buck stops in Aso Rock.
Yeah, but David, aren't you said it's the responsibility of the victim to work towards not being victimized. Aren't you victim shaming and blaming? That's a rhetorical question. I was trying to make a joke. But you made mention of the line items and saying that they were quite vague, and whoever's doing this bulk transfers should have been able to flag them. And that takes me to the Financial Crimes Commission, not necessarily EFCC, but the unit that is for the bank. I think it's called the NFIU, which is the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, which is supposed to flag issues like this and raise it up to either the EFCC or the National Advisor, the National Security Advisor. It makes me wonder whether or not, these units are seeing them as flagging them, or if they just sweep it under the carpet or take it at face value. And so it takes me to also my other question of to identify who this money are being transferred to. I know USAID is the entirety of Africa, but specifically for Nigeria, with those line items and those transfers, those coming to Nigeria, were you able to identify who these organizations are, these individuals are, or CSOs?
As far as USAID goes, not really, because again, these are the best people in the world at hiding financial flows, at concealing the true destination of such things. However, what I will also mention with regards to the NFIU and EFCC is that I've had interactions with them previously. So I remember in 2022, I was part of a team that we gained access to a database of payments from a Qatari charity that has been linked to terror financing around the world. It's called E-Charity, that's EID, E-Charity. And I was contacted, so this group was based in Washington, so they contacted me because Nigeria was mentioned in the report. And I extracted the data for Nigeria, and I established that between, I believe it was 2007 to 2022, that nothing less than $12 million had been funneled from this terror-linked Qatari charity to this completely anonymous entity in Nigeria called Jiras Al-Khair Foundation, right? Completely anonymous entity, doesn't have CAC registration, doesn't appear to, the only proof that it exists is a signboard somewhere in Ibadan saying Jiras Al-Khair Foundation and this tiny little one-story house. So it's incredible that $12 million would have been funneled to a one-story house somewhere in Ibadan over the course of more than a decade, and nobody knew about it. And this thing doesn't even have CAC registration. So I reached out to the EFCC spokesperson, Dele Oyewale, and I also reached out to the NFIU before I published the story to get their comments that this is a very clear-cut case of terror finance. And this is a terror financing pipeline. You have payment details here. You have, this is cast iron information. What are you going to do about it? And I didn't even get a response to my emails, my WhatsApp messages. They just completely blanked me. So in EFCC's case, Dele Oyewale actually read my message, because I sent him a message on WhatsApp. I saw the double blue tick, so he read my message and he completely ignored me till today as we speak. So that gives you an idea of what our institutions think of as enforcement, really. I guess if it's not a politically sensitive issue, or maybe the president hasn't ordered them to do something, then they're just not going to do anything.
All right. Well, David, I want to say thank you very much for following the paper trail. Oh, by the way, is that a white wall behind you? Is it a wall, what we can see?
Yes. Okay. Yes, it is.
Next time we come to you, please have a picture on it, okay? Just something to tell us a bit about.
I'll try.
Thank you very much.
African history, then you've probably come across the name Muammar Gaddafi. But if you haven't, don't worry. You're about to learn something fascinating. Gaddafi was one of the most controversial leaders Africa has ever seen. Born on June 7th, 1942, in a small Libyan town called Qasr Abu Hadi. He rose to power in 1969 and held onto it for a staggering 42 years. That's more than 4 decades of ruling Libya, until it all came crashing down in 2011. His story didn't have a peaceful ending. On October 20th, 2011, after a fierce battle in his hometown of Sirte, Gaddafi was captured and killed. But why did it happen? What led to the downfall of a man who once held so much power? Some say it was because of his iron-fisted rule. Others believe there was more to the story, something bigger happening behind the scenes. When things took a turn for the worse, Gaddafi tried to escape. He and his loyal guards hid in a massive drainage pipe, hoping to evade capture. But their pursuers, the National Transitional Council fighters, weren't far behind. When they finally found him, gunfire erupted, marking the end of an era. But was his downfall just about dictatorship? Or was there something else at play? Why was Muammar Gaddafi really silenced? Many people believe it was because of the way he ruled Libya, but the truth runs much deeper. His downfall wasn't just about politics. It was about money, power, and control over Africa's future. Gaddafi had a bold vision. He wanted Africa to break free from the influence of Western currencies by introducing a single gold-backed currency called the gold dinar. If this plan had worked, it would have completely changed how African nations traded their resources. Countries in Europe, Asia, and the US would have had no choice but to buy African oil and minerals using this new currency. That would have shifted economic power toward Africa, something global superpowers weren't willing to let happen. Determined to turn his dream into reality, Gaddafi pushed this idea hard through the African Union, especially during his time as chairman in 2009. His plan wasn't just talk, he was actively working to make it happen. But as his influence grew, so did the resistance against him. When the uprising in Libya began, it wasn't just about removing a dictator, it was about eliminating a man who threatened the financial order of the world. Before his death in 2011, Gaddafi endured brutal treatment at the hands of opposition forces, and when the battle in Sirte came to a bloody end, so did his life. Muammar Gaddafi had a plan that could have changed the entire economic landscape of Africa, and that made a lot of powerful nations very uneasy. His idea was simple but revolutionary: create a new gold-backed currency for Africa, the gold dinar. If this became a reality, African nations would no longer rely on the US dollar or the euro to trade their oil and natural resources. Instead, countries buying from Africa would have to use this new currency, shifting financial power away from Western economies. That was a threat the West wasn't willing to ignore. The idea wasn't just talk. Gaddafi had the resources to make it happen. Libya's central bank reportedly held around 144 tons of gold, enough to kickstart this new financial system. He believed that once the gold dinar took hold, not just African nations, but also many Muslim countries would follow suit. This would have weakened the grip of Western powers over African economies and, in effect, ended modern-day colonial influence. This wasn't the first time a leader had challenged the global financial system and faced severe consequences. Saddam Hussein, the former president of Iraq, made a similar move when he decided to sell oil in euros instead of US dollars. That decision put him at odds with the United States, which saw it as a direct attack on its economic dominance. Many believe it was one of the reasons he was eventually removed from power. A shift like this could have triggered a new kind of financial conflict, a currency war. Throughout history, nations have fought not just with weapons but with money, using trade and currency manipulation as tools to maintain control. If Africa adopted the gold dinar, it could have sparked a financial battle between economic giants, shaking up markets in the West, the Middle East, and beyond. Muammar Gaddafi's dream of a united Africa with its own gold-backed currency wasn't just an idea, it was a ticking time bomb for Western powers. But how did they even find out about it? Behind the scenes, high-level officials in the US were already keeping an eye on Libya. One of President Barack Obama's senior advisors, Sidney Blumenthal, sent an email to then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton with alarming news. Libya was sitting on a massive stockpile of 143 tons of gold and an equal amount of silver. This wasn't just wealth. It was the foundation of Gaddafi's plan to introduce a new currency that could break Africa's dependence on the US dollar and the euro. By March 2011, as tensions in Libya escalated, these reserves were quietly moved toward the country's southwestern border, near Niger and Chad. But it wasn't just the US that was concerned. Across the Atlantic, French President Nicolas Sarkozy had his own reasons to worry. Sarkozy saw Libya as an opportunity, both politically and economically. Gaddafi's gold dinar plan wasn't just a threat to Western currencies, it was also a direct challenge to French influence over its former African colonies. For decades, many West African nations had used the CFA franc, a currency tied to France. If Gaddafi succeeded in replacing it with an African-controlled gold-backed currency, France's grip on these economies would weaken. That was something Sarkozy wasn't willing to let happen. But his ambitions didn't stop there. Controlling Libya's oil production, boosting France's military standing, and strengthening his political position at home were also on his list of priorities. With Libya in chaos, he saw an opportunity to strike. Meanwhile, in Washington, Clinton was also weighing the risks. If Africa established its own strong currency, it would mark the end of an era where Western nations dictated economic terms to the continent. The balance of power would shift, and global financial systems would be shaken. The leaked email discussing Libya's gold and silver reserves revealed just how high the stakes were. For African nations, Gaddafi's plan was a bold step toward economic independence. For the West, it was a dangerous move that needed to be stopped. If you are still watching this video, it means you like content like this. Why not take out a second and hit that like button so that it reaches more Africans? Have you done that? Let us move on. Gaddafi's plan could have rewritten Africa's economic future. His idea, a single gold-backed currency known as the gold dinar. This wasn't just about money, it was about independence. Gaddafi wanted African nations to stop using the US dollar for oil sales and instead trade using their own wealth-backed currency. This move would have redirected oil revenues away from Western-controlled banks and straight into the hands of African governments. Countries like Nigeria, Egypt, Tunisia, and Angola were already considering the switch. If this plan had succeeded, Africa would have taken a huge step toward financial freedom, breaking free from economic dependency on Western nations. But before the gold dinar could become a reality, everything changed. In March 2011, NATO forces launched a military campaign in Libya, claiming it was to protect human rights and promote democracy. Many Libyans, influenced by Western media, believed these promises. But behind the scenes, something much bigger was at play. For over 42 years, Gaddafi had maintained power by uniting Libya's many tribes, offering free healthcare, nearly free gasoline, affordable education, and even a state-funded water system. His leadership had its critics, but it also provided stability. When Gaddafi was removed, Libya fell into chaos, and the dream of a gold-backed African currency was buried with him. He wanted to free Libya and the entire continent from reliance on Western-controlled banking systems. His solution? Backed by Libya's vast reserves of gold. This wasn't just an idea, it was already in motion. Several African nations were eager to join him, ready to ditch the US dollar for oil sales and embrace a currency that Africa controlled. If this had worked, it would have sent shockwaves through the global economy, cutting into the profits of Western financial institutions that had long benefited from Africa's dependence on their money. But before the dream could become a reality, Gaddafi's world unraveled. NATO forces, alongside Libyan rebels, launched a military campaign to remove him from power. As the fighting intensified, Gaddafi was forced to flee, eventually hiding in a drainage pipe on the outskirts of Sirte. When NATO-backed fighters found him, they opened fire, hitting him in the leg and back. Reports later emerged that someone from his own circle may have also shot him to prevent him from being captured alive. Moments later, Libya's longtime leader was dead. Videos of his final moments quickly spread across the internet, showing the brutal end of a man who had ruled for over 4 decades. His son, Mutassim Gaddafi, was also killed, and both were quietly buried just days later. Why did powerful entities really had to silence Gaddafi? Muammar Gaddafi wasn't just a leader, he was a game changer. His policies gave Libyans benefits that many people around the world, but what made life better for his people also made him a major threat to powerful interests outside Libya. Let's break down some of the things he did that upset his opponents. 1. Free electricity for everyone. Imagine never having to pay an electricity bill. Under Gaddafi, power was free for all Libyan citizens. No monthly bills, no hidden fees, just free electricity, courtesy of the state. 2. Nearly free gas, healthcare, and education. Fuel was so cheap in Libya that filling up a car's tank cost less than a bottle of water. Healthcare and education were heavily subsidized, making them almost free for everyone. Whether you needed medical treatment or wanted to study, money was never an obstacle. 3. A massive gold reserve. Libya had a massive stockpile of gold, around 143 tons according to leaked reports. The same amount of silver was stored away too. If Gaddafi had used these reserves to back a new currency, Libya could have become one of the richest and most...
See, they stole all that gold. It's in Fort Knox right now. See, what's in Fort Knox is not our old gold. We've been and wasted that shit. I told y'all the other day, we've been stealing gold from all over the world and trying to replace what the small heads have stashed away.
most powerful nations in Africa, shaking up the global financial system. 4th, interest-free loans. Libyan banks operated under a unique system. Loans were given at 0% interest by law. People could borrow money without worrying about paying back extra, which made home ownership and business growth much easier. 5. Housing was a basic right. Gaddafi believed that every Libyan deserved a home. He even promised that he wouldn't move into his own house until every citizen had one first. Owning a home wasn't seen as a luxury. It was considered a basic right. 6. Government support for newlyweds. Starting a family in Libya came with government benefits. Newly married couples received financial assistance to help them build a home and settle into their new life. These policies made life comfortable for Libyans, but they also put Gaddafi on a collision course with powerful global forces that didn't want to see an independent Libya rise. Muammar Gaddafi wasn't just a leader, he was a man with big ideas, ideas that made some people love him and others see him as a serious problem. His vision for Libya and Africa didn't sit well with powerful forces, both inside and outside his country. But what exactly made him such a target? One of Gaddafi's most ambitious projects was the Great Man-Made River, an enormous irrigation system designed to bring fresh water from deep underground aquifers to Libya's cities and farmlands. This was no small feat. It was the largest irrigation project in the world, entirely funded by Libya itself. No loans from the IMF, no foreign aid, just Libya investing in its own future. But when NATO forces launched their military campaign, they didn't just go after Gaddafi, they deliberately bombed the irrigation system, along with the factory that produced the pipes for it. The destruction left millions of Libyans.
So we need to ask that black general who was fired today, that bootlicker, why did you do this to Libya? As you've been funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda and enslaving black girls all over Africa. Why did you kill Gaddafi? Shoe shiner? Boy, you shined some shoes, didn't you, boy? I thought it was all good. You thought we forgot about this? So everybody who want to know, when we're talking about Libya, the bootlicking Greek freak who was fired by Trump, his hands all over this. See, he was going to be the face of AFRICOM. That's a fact, bro.
Libyans without access to fresh water. If their goal was to free the Libyan people,
that was his reward.
Why take away their water? Gaddafi's influence wasn't limited to Libya. His push for a new Africa-wide currency had the potential to shake up global economics, reducing Africa's dependence on Western financial institutions. He was vocal about breaking free from external control, and that made him a threat to those who benefited from Africa's economic dependence. Despite his flaws, many Libyans and Africans saw Gaddafi as a leader who genuinely wanted his people to prosper. He often appeared on television, answering questions directly from the public. Some viewed him as a dictator, while others saw him as a revolutionary who wanted to shift power away from the West and into the hands of Africans. For over 40 years, Muammar Gaddafi was at the center of Libya's political landscape. shaping the country's policies and commanding a fierce loyalty among his supporters. He wasn't just a leader, he was a symbol of resistance against foreign influence, advocating for African unity and economic independence. Under his rule, Libya underwent massive transformations. In 1977, he introduced a new socialist model, claiming to give power to the people while still maintaining control over the military and key government structures. His leadership style sparked both admiration and criticism, but one thing was certain: he had a vision for Africa that didn't align with Western interests. Throughout history, African leaders who sought to free their nations from outside control often faced violent opposition. Patrice Lumumba in Congo, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa in Nigeria, and Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso all shared similar fates. Gaddafi's downfall seemed to follow the same pattern. Was it just another chapter in the long history of leaders who challenged global power structures? With Gaddafi gone, many questions remain. Did his dream of an independent African economy vanish with him? Was his removal truly for the benefit of the Libyan people, or was it a strategic move to maintain foreign control over Africa's resources? And more importantly, is there any leader today bold enough to pick up where he left off? If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe.
U.S. government agencies. Every day, the world is watching videos of Donald Trump signing executive orders and dismantling U.S. government agencies, all in an effort to make America great again. But what if I told you that with every signature, he's actually making the U.S. much weaker on the global stage and systematically creating a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for one of America's greatest geopolitical rivals to step in and fill the void? In Trump's first month in office, he has pulled the United States out of some of the world's most important organizations and agreements. The World Health Organization, check. Paris Climate Accords, check. Donald Trump has even withdrawn the United States from the United Nations Human Rights Council. And whether you agree with Trump's decisions or not, the outcome is undeniable. Each time the US steps back, it leaves an empty space in global leadership. But Trump's latest move to shut down USAID is giving China one of the greatest geopolitical wins in 2025. USAID, which stands for the United States Agency for International Development, was created to provide humanitarian assistance, fight poverty, and support development in struggling nations across the world. Now, to be fair, USAID has funded real charitable efforts, from disaster relief to healthcare programs, even HIV outreach. But that's only half the story. USAID has also been deeply tied to political interference, corruption, and regime change operations around the world. It's simply been used as a tool to push US foreign policy, often in ways that have destabilized the very countries it claimed to help. USAID has also been the primary vehicle the US government has used to produce anti-China content and an intense overseas media battle. Last September, the House of Representatives passed a bill of $1.6 billion to deliver anti-China propaganda overseas, and as this article from Responsible Statecraft points out, to discredit Beijing's Belt and Road initiatives worldwide. Trust me, this is the major story developing in US-China relations right now, because with Trump shutting down USAID, we're witnessing something even bigger: the unraveling of America's role as the world's sole superpower. At the same time, China is increasing international funding, positioning themselves as a key negotiator in global conflicts, and using the Belt and Road Initiative to cement their influence across the developing world. Trump may call it America First, but in reality, it looks a lot more like America handing global leadership to China on a silver platter. Just look at this Business Insider article, which reveals that the USAID shutdown could make China more powerful. It reveals USAID was founded at the Cold War's height, but has never operated as a purely altruistic agency. Instead, the agency works with strategically important countries and assists U.S. commercial interests. In the words of Democratic Senator Andy Kim, Our assistance abroad helps fight disease and stop starvation and famine, but it's also a tool to stave off the expansionist reach of authoritarian leaders in China, Russia, and Iran. That's quite the bold statement from a U.S. senator who has publicly admitted that while USAID does in fact help people with charity, the organization most importantly is a propaganda tool used against countries that the United States government sees as a threat. And whether it's regime change operations throughout South America or arming internationally designated terrorist organizations in Syria, almost every government collapse in recent memory has the United States playing a role at some point along the way, all the while costing U.S. taxpayers billions of dollars. But Trump's closure of USAID has just exposed how much the U.S. government has been spending on propaganda around the world. In 2023, the agency funded training and support for 6,200 journalists, assisted 707 non-state news outlets, and supported 279 media sector civil society organizations dedicated to strengthening independent media. The 2025 foreign aid budget included over $268 million allocated by Congress to support independent media and the free flow of information. Translation: the cost of spreading U.S. propaganda worldwide. This just goes to show how extensive and far-reaching the narrative push has been. It really makes you question just how much truly independent journalism is really out there, which is precisely why YouTube is becoming the #1 resource for people wanting to find truly independent media, much like the channel you're watching now. What's hilarious, though, is that this entire operation is built on the premise that the US is somehow still a beacon of democracy. Back in the 1990s, maybe you could push this idea, but in 2025, it's downright laughable. Now we're seeing mask-off moments from legacy media and their benefactors. Take a look at this Washington Post headline: independent media in Russia, Ukraine lose their funding with USAID freeze. Independent media? Really? In Ukraine, 9 out of 10 media outlets rely on USAID funding, and the media industry has received hundreds of millions of dollars going back for over 10 years. When the vast majority of your media is funded by a foreign government, how can you honestly claim to have independent media? It's frankly absurd. If you look at the top 10 countries receiving USAID funding, it's no surprise that Ukraine tops the list, pulling in nearly $5.5 billion in 2024 alone. The next 9 countries each received hundreds of millions of dollars in funding as well. USAID shutting down marks a major retreat of American influence on the global stage. And whether you see that as a positive or negative, one thing is clear: the US is losing its grip, and the world is shifting in a new direction. But of course, one of the largest sources of US propaganda is the entire ecosystem of US-funded anti-China journalists and think tanks. This tweet went viral last week, explaining the panic the freezing of funding has had on the anti-China media sphere. Because of the US funding freezing, the entire global ecosystem of China nonprofits is facing an extinction event. I'm not exaggerating for clicks. This is really what is happening. There is genuine panic from the author of this tweet. But to be honest, the author fails to see the irony that she herself has exposed in this thread. She goes on to state, funding from a single government should not be the only thing standing between us and an information blackout on Chinese civil society. So let me get this right. The only way to learn about Chinese civil society is from nonprofits funded by the US government? I challenge the author of this tweet, and anyone for that matter, who relies on the US government for insights into China. If you really want to see what Chinese civil society looks like, buy a plane ticket, fly to China, and go experience it for yourself. Over 65 countries, including the United States, are now visa-free to China, and I have yet to meet a foreigner who has actually traveled to China firsthand and not come away with a completely different experience than what is presented to us daily in Western media. The author continues, a key part of China's agenda is to persuade its own citizens and the world falsely through deception and coercion that democratic systems are not better. Beijing claims its system is the best way to guarantee economic prosperity and stability. But once again, this is a completely false statement. Beijing's opinion is that its form of government is the best for China, and only China. Beijing's government does not go around the world spreading communism and forcing other countries to adapt its system. Interesting enough, that's exactly what the US government does, forcing regime changes and interfering in the domestic politics of independent sovereign nations. Even one of my favorite YouTubers, Johnny Harris, produced a full video mapping every US government-backed coup around the world. The US government actively sanctions many countries around the globe for the sole reason of them not being a democracy. And it's time that journalists, and frankly, every US citizen takes a step back and really examines the state of America's own democracy in 2025. Donald Trump is now going above the law dismantling government agencies without congressional approval, putting in his billionaire friends like Elon Musk into high-ranking, unofficial government positions while simultaneously angering every ally of the United States. Ask a Canadian or European how they feel about US democracy right now. America's allies are in absolute shock on how the US president has conducted himself during the first month of office. And to drive this point home, I want you to read this article from the Financial Times entitled Vance's Real Warning to Europe, which states, "It is clear that the US can no longer be regarded as a reliable ally for the Europeans. The Trump administration's political ambitions for Europe mean that for now, America is also an adversary, threatening democracy in Europe and even European territory. Trump will use any leverage he has to force America's European allies into compliance on issues from trade and security to their domestic politics. That means that Europe must now start the painful process of de-risking its relationship with the US, looking for areas of dangerous dependence on America and stripping them out of the system. Like I mentioned at the start of today's video, there is a large vacuum being created by the US government, and there is only one country large enough and powerful enough to fill the United States seat at the table. And this, of course, is China. In fact, we've already seen Europe begin this process of de-risking from the United States. Michael Schumann, chairman of Germany's largest federal trade organization, recently stated, "The German economy is under immense pressure. We need policies based on national interest rather than ideological considerations. Trump's return is reshaping global geopolitics. Europe must carefully weigh its options and act in its own interests. Strengthening EU-China relations is clearly a part of that strategy. Good relations with China are in Germany's interests." I'll include a link to all the resources I've used in today's video down in the description for you below. But the simple truth is the United States' reputation is taking a massive hit on the global stage. Meanwhile, with the shutdown of USAID funding, China will have more space to expand its global influence. Simply put, China looks like the good guy on the international stage simply by doing nothing. But China is not satisfied with just that. Through its commitments with the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing has spent more than $1 trillion on gas pipelines, trains, and other trade and infrastructure projects globally. I mean, just look at this map detailing Chinese infrastructure projects in Latin America. The US government is in genuine shock over how much Chinese influence and investment is pouring into the region. But now take a look at the share of foreign aid China sends to each region of the world, almost a perfect distribution across the globe. This ensures that China's influence won't be restricted to its own backyard, but a leader on the world stage. At the country level in 2023, China invested most heavily through BRI in Indonesia at $7.3 billion, followed by Hungary at $4.5 billion and Peru at $2.9 billion. In Africa, where nearly every country has received Chinese investments, new roads, railways, and ports have been constructed over the past 10 years, while billions have been invested into energy infrastructure projects to give more residents electricity. In September last year, Xi Jinping said that China would commit more than $50 billion to Africa in financial aid. And this commitment to Africa alone is larger than the entire $32.5 billion the US spent on aid in the fiscal year of 2024. All of these commitments more than fill the America-sized hole left behind on the global stage, most importantly, in the fastest growing regions in the world. Everyone, Trump's shutdown of USAID is more than just a symbolic move. It's signs of a broader, ongoing dismantling of America's global leadership. This is the moment when America's claim to global leadership is truly called into question as China emerges as a more stable, constructive force on the world stage. But now, I want to shift our focus to the investing portion of today's video.
Donald Trump has issued yet another economic threat, this time targeting BRICS nations with a massive 150% tariff on their exports if they dare to discuss an alternative to the US dollar. What's his claim? BRICS is trying to destroy the dollar by working on an independent financial system that could bypass US control. And what's Trump's response? Economic coercion. He wants to punish any BRICS country that even mentions de-dollarization. But the real question is this: If BRICS were truly irrelevant, why would Trump need to threaten them with tariffs just to keep them from creating their currency? If the US dollar were so strong, why would Washington be so afraid of BRICS moving forward with its financial system? The answer is clear. America is panicking. But can they stop BRICS? Let's find out. For nearly a century, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency, giving Washington tremendous power over global trade and finance. The dominance of the dollar means that countries must hold large reserves of USD, use it to settle international trade, and rely on American-controlled financial systems like SWIFT. This setup has allowed the US government to manipulate global markets, print money at will, and impose crippling sanctions on nations that refuse to follow Washington's orders. However, BRICS is working to dismantle this system, and Trump's extreme response proves just how threatened the US is. The petrodollar system is at the heart of US financial dominance. In the 1970s, Washington struck a deal with Saudi Arabia, ensuring that all oil transactions were conducted in dollars. This forced every oil-importing nation to hold reserves of USD, artificially boosting the currency's value. But now, BRICS is challenging this setup, and the petrodollar system is beginning to unravel. China and Russia have already abandoned the dollar for bilateral trade, with over 90% of their transactions now conducted in yuan and rubles. India is buying Russian oil in rupees, cutting the dollar out of energy transactions altogether. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have openly discussed selling oil in yuan, signaling that even America's historical energy allies are looking for alternatives. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) has confirmed that the US dollar's dominance is shrinking. Back in 2000, the dollar made up more than 70% of global reserves. By 2023, this had fallen to just 58%, and the decline continues. Meanwhile, China's digital yuan is already being tested for oil trade transactions, proving that an alternative financial system is becoming a reality. If BRICS succeeds in launching an alternative global reserve currency, the United States will lose its most powerful tool of global influence. Without the world's reliance on the dollar, Washington can no longer impose sanctions, control capital flows, or manipulate markets. This isn't about fair trade. This is about the US fighting to maintain its grip over a world that is slipping out of its control. Trump knows that if BRICS continues its de-dollarization strategy, the dollar's global importance will erode, leading to a financial crisis for Washington. The US economy is built on debt, and that debt is sustained by global demand for the dollar. If BRICS nations, and eventually others, start trading in their currencies, the artificial demand for USD will disappear, sending inflation skyrocketing in America and weakening Washington's ability to project power globally. This is why Trump is so afraid of BRICS's financial ambitions. The bloc isn't just creating an alternative currency. It is laying the groundwork for a world where the US no longer calls the shots. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. Trump has tried to portray himself as a tough leader, claiming that his threats forced BRICS to back down. But the reality is far different. Instead of falling apart, BRICS has expanded at an unprecedented rate. At the 2023 BRICS Summit, 5 new countries, Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates, were officially welcomed into the bloc. This expansion is one of the largest geopolitical shifts in decades, as more nations turn toward BRICS as a counterbalance to Western financial dominance. Meanwhile, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and Thailand are actively discussing joining BRICS shortly. Trump's weapon of choice, tariffs, has been a failure in the past. In 2018, he imposed massive tariffs on China, believing it would force Beijing to change its trade policies. Instead, China retaliated by cutting agricultural imports from the US, devastating American farmers. Prices for consumer goods skyrocketed, and manufacturing jobs declined due to the rising costs of imported materials. And now, a 150% tariff on BRICS nations would cripple American businesses. The US relies heavily on BRICS imports, including electronics, rare earth metals, agricultural products, and pharmaceuticals. If these goods are heavily taxed, American companies will be forced to increase prices, leading to higher inflation and a weaker economy. Meanwhile, BRICS has plenty of trade alternatives. China can redirect exports to Africa and Latin America. Russia has expanded its energy trade with India and the Middle East, replacing US markets with stronger BRICS economic ties. Brazil and South Africa, major exporters of food and natural resources, are strengthening their trade partnerships with China and Europe. Trump's tariff strategy is doomed to fail. Instead of weakening BRICS, it will push the bloc to accelerate its plans for economic independence, ensuring that Washington's influence continues to decline. Trump's aggressive trade policies are not only failing to weaken BRICS, they are isolating the United States from the global economy. While BRICS nations are forging new trade relationships, the US is losing influence even among its allies. China and Russia's bilateral trade reached a record $240 billion in 2023, proving that Western sanctions have failed to isolate Moscow. India is expanding energy purchases from Russia, moving away from the US-dominated oil market. Africa's trade with China reached $282 billion in 2023, showing that African nations are prioritizing partnerships outside of Western influence. Meanwhile, the US is not just isolating itself from BRICS, it is also alienating its closest allies. Trump's aggressive tariff policies have backfired, damaging long-standing relationships with Mexico, Canada, and the European Union. By imposing tariffs on Mexican and Canadian imports, Trump has pushed both nations to strengthen trade ties with China and the EU, reducing their reliance on the US market. At the same time, the European Union is actively exploring alternative financial systems. With increasing concerns over US sanctions and the dollar's instability, European nations are considering diversifying trade settlements in currencies like the yuan and euro. By waging trade wars even against allies, Washington is accelerating the decline of the US-led economic order. As more nations seek alternatives, the US is becoming more isolated on the global stage. While BRICS is expanding and thriving, the US is becoming more isolated and unreliable. So, what's the future of all this? BRICS is no longer just reacting to US economic threats. It is actively building an alternative financial system that could reshape global trade forever. This is not a vague possibility. The foundation for a BRICS-led financial revolution is already being put into place. Russia has proposed a gold-backed BRICS currency, which could become a direct competitor to the US dollar in international trade. A currency backed by real commodities like gold and natural resources would offer stability, protection against inflation, and a secure alternative to fiat currencies controlled by Western central banks. Unlike the US dollar, which is based on debt and can be printed without limits, a gold-backed BRICS currency would maintain real value, making it attractive to nations looking for a stable, long-term store of wealth. China is already leading the charge in digital finance. Its digital yuan is being tested for international oil transactions, proving that the US dollar is no longer the only viable option for global trade. China's digital currency is far ahead of the West in terms of adoption, with countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE exploring its use for oil sales. If major oil producers begin accepting payments in yuan instead of dollars, this could end the petrodollar system, which has kept the US dollar dominant for decades. One thing is clear: the 150% tariffs won't threaten BRICS, but will instead make them stronger. Every time Washington attacks BRICS financially, the bloc finds ways to reduce its reliance on the US even further. Trump's tariff threats are not a deterrent. They are fuel for BRICS to accelerate its economic independence. As BRICS expands its financial networks, more countries will join the movement to break away from the US-led economic order. The world is moving toward a multipolar financial system, and the US is running out of ways to stop it. Trump's tariff threats aren't a demonstration of strength. They reveal Washington's desperation. The US is no longer in control of the global economy, and BRICS is proving that nations can thrive without relying on the dollar. As more countries move toward de-dollarization, develop independent trade networks, and adopt alternative financial systems. The US grip on global finance is slipping. The era of American economic dominance is ending, and the future belongs to a multipolar world led by BRICS. Tariffs won't stop this shift. They will only push BRICS nations to accelerate their financial independence. The only question is, how long can the US delay the inevitable? Do you think they can stop BRICS? Let us know in the comments.
In today's ever-evolving global landscape, nations are constantly recalibrating their diplomatic strategies, aligning with emerging powers to enhance their economic prospects. Among the most pivotal shifts in recent years has been the rise of BRICS, a powerful coalition of emerging economies comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Together, these countries have not only enhanced their economic and political stature, but have also become a force to be reckoned with on the world stage. However, just when the world thought BRICS had reached its full potential, a new and exciting chapter began. Enter Thailand, a nation now firmly in the fold of BRICS as its newest partner. Thailand's decision to join this coalition is not just a diplomatic move. It's a bold statement about its ambitions and aspirations on the global stage. But what does this partnership mean for Thailand, BRICS, and the world at large? Let's dive into Thailand's strategic decision to become part of BRICS, exploring the long-term implications for global trade, regional cooperation, and its emerging role as a global player. This moment marks a crucial juncture in the evolving world order, one that brings new opportunities for Thailand and many others looking to navigate the complexities of today's shifting geopolitical landscape. Before we delve into Thailand's role, it's crucial to understand the very essence of BRICS, why it was formed, and how it has evolved. The acronym BRICS originally stood for Brazil, Russia, India, and China, countries identified as emerging economic giants with the potential to transform global trade and investment. The concept was first coined by economist Jim O'Neill in 2001, and what began as a theoretical idea soon gained immense traction as these nations showcased impressive economic growth. At its core, BRICS was formed as a counterbalance to the traditional dominance of Western powers, particularly in global institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, WTO. These organizations had long been controlled by the United States and its European allies. As BRICS member nations grew economically, they began to challenge the status quo, advocating for a more balanced and inclusive global system. In 2010, South Africa joined the group, transforming BRIC into BRICS and ensuring Africa's representation in global economic discussions. This expansion reflected BRICS's commitment to fostering a more diverse and equitable international platform. Now, in 2023, BRICS is expanding once again, this time by inviting Thailand into its fold. This move signals BRICS's growing influence in Southeast Asia, a region that has become increasingly important in global economic and political affairs. Thailand, strategically positioned in the heart of Southeast Asia, has long been a key player in the region, known for its vibrant economy and diplomatic neutrality. Over the years, Thailand has transformed its economy from being primarily agrarian to one of Southeast Asia's most industrialized and diversified. Renowned for its robust automotive manufacturing, electronics, and agricultural exports, Thailand is now poised to expand its global reach further through its partnership with BRICS. Beyond economic power, Thailand's role in regional cooperation has been instrumental. As an active member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, Thailand has promoted political stability, peace, and economic development across Southeast Asia. Despite occasional political unrest, Thailand's commitment to democratic governance combined with military influence has kept its economy stable and prosperous. So why has Thailand chosen BRICS? And why is BRICS eager to welcome Thailand into the fold? The answer lies in the mutually beneficial nature of the partnership. For Thailand, the economic opportunities are abundant. BRICS nations, collectively accounting for nearly a quarter of the world's GDP, offer new markets for Thailand's export-driven economy. With China, India, and Brazil as some of the world's largest emerging economies, Thailand can tap into a wealth of opportunities for growth in sectors like automotive, electronics, and agriculture. Thailand's strategic access to these markets ensures its place at the heart of global supply chains. Moreover, BRICS has established institutions like the New Development Bank, NDB, which funds infrastructure projects in emerging economies. Thailand, with its growing infrastructure needs, stands to benefit significantly from these resources. Whether it's building roads, boosting digital connectivity, or enhancing energy infrastructure, BRICS's support will prove invaluable to Thailand's continued development. On the diplomatic front, Thailand's partnership with BRICS further solidifies its neutral foreign policy stance, which has long allowed it to maintain cordial relationships with both Eastern and Western powers. As a bridge between these two worlds, Thailand can use BRICS as a platform to amplify its voice on global issues like trade, climate change, and security. This boosts Thailand's presence in international discussions and ensures it can advocate for the interests of developing economies on the global stage. Thailand's participation in BRICS is not just an economic boon. It's also about positioning itself as a key player in Southeast Asia's ongoing transformation. With a rapidly growing consumer market, a strategic location, and diverse industries, Southeast Asia is poised to play a significant role in shaping the global economy. Thailand, as the second largest economy in the region, is perfectly positioned to serve as a conduit for deeper economic cooperation between BRICS and ASEAN. By joining BRICS, Thailand enhances ASEAN's relations with the group, creating pathways for greater trade, investment, and diplomatic engagement. This partnership allows Thailand to leverage its position as a leader in ASEAN to push for fairer global trade policies and better practices that benefit developing countries across the globe. As the global power balance continues to shift away from the West, Thailand's decision to align with BRICS is a strategic move to diversify its international alliances. This is especially relevant as tensions between the US and China escalate, with each power seeking to exert influence over global economic and political systems. By joining BRICS, Thailand is positioning itself as a neutral yet influential player on the world stage. This partnership provides an alternative platform for diplomatic engagement and economic cooperation, allowing Thailand to mediate between competing global powers. Whether it's facilitating trade talks, fostering security dialogues, or addressing climate change, Thailand's role in BRICS ensures it has a voice in shaping the future of international relations. Looking ahead, Thailand's future within BRICS is filled with promise. As the country deepens its economic ties with BRICS members, it will continue to explore new avenues for cooperation in sectors like renewable energy, digital innovation, and sustainable agriculture. Thailand's manufacturing prowess, coupled with its growing tech industry, makes it an attractive partner for BRICS nations in these emerging areas. As BRICS continues to grow, Thailand's influence within the group will only increase. With its commitment to global governance reform and fairer policies, Thailand is poised to help shape a new world order, one where emerging and developing economies play a central role in shaping global policy. In conclusion, Thailand's partnership with BRICS is more than just an economic opportunity. It's a strategic move that positions Thailand as a major global player. This partnership not only diversifies Thailand's global alliances, but also strengthens its diplomatic and economic influence on the world stage. By working alongside the world's most influential emerging economies, Thailand is helping to build a more inclusive and equitable world, one where developing nations have a louder voice and a stronger hand in shaping the future of global policy and development.
Be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. So you said, you were just talking a little, you said we need to understand that China is different. We're not going to be able to tariff them into submission. And then you said, this is very simple. If you want to stop Chinese from doing the things you don't like, What are some of the things that we don't like that they're doing?
Well, there are a number of things. First of all, there are huge numbers of Chinese that have penetrated our labs. This is not new. This started back in the 90s. You'll recall under President Clinton, you had this Chinese scientist that suddenly made off with all sorts of nuclear secrets from Los Alamos. And everybody stood around and said, well, how in the hell did this man ever get into Los Alamos? Well, it's not just Los Alamos. It's all over the country. Major universities, engineering firms. And then, of course, you have the internet problem. And that on top of that, you also have people say, well, look at fentanyl. Fentanyl is coming from China and that's killing us. We don't realize that the ingredients that constitute fentanyl are loaded onto trains every day in San Francisco and San Diego and shipped south into Mexico where they're mixed. Yeah, the ingredients come from China, no question about it, but they're mixed down in Mexico. And so people turn around and say, well, we just need to bomb Mexico. You know, we always have the bombs away club, right? Whatever's wrong, well, we bomb them. The bombs away club has a big role in MAGA, I think. I like MAGA in many respects, but the bombs away club is bad news. And so whenever we bomb some poor country that has no way to defend itself, you know, you've got this cheering section. Oh, great, America's great. America's great again. Look, we bombed somebody. And I don't want to do that because I don't see anything particularly great about bombing anybody anywhere, least of all China. You've got a snowball's chance in hell of fighting a war and making a dent in China. So I tell people, look, you don't like what these people are doing inside your country. Well, you can expel them. You can close your border. In other words, close it in the sense that you're going to secure it. You're not going to let everybody and their brother in that wants to come in. You got to do the same thing at airports and harbors. That's where you need to focus. You need to police the country, restore the rule of law, and then throw these people out. We have a lot of Chinese students, for instance, who've been caught as mules for the drug cartels. They're just moving quantities of cash, less than $250,000. And they move it around, and occasionally we pick them up and find this pile of cash and find out this guy's a student from China. Well, maybe we don't need too many students from China anymore. You know, I used to go to North Korea, or not North Korea, but South Korea and Japan occasionally on business. And they would always look at me and they would say, why are you Americans so stupid? Of course, you know, that's a question that deserves a lot of answers. But, you know, I looked at them and I said, what are you talking about? I said, do you see any Chinese in our universities? Do you see any Chinese in our laboratories? Do you see any Chinese in our country? I said, well, I don't know. I said, no. What is wrong with you? They've been doing this for 2,000 years. They steal it and send it home. There's a lot of truth in that. So we just have to come to terms with what we're dealing with. That doesn't mean we need to go to war.
Well, I mean, obviously the Chinese are here to keep Bill Gates from buying up all the rest of the farmland. I mean, it was never going to be for us. We're just the people who live here. So what do you think about all the saber rattling about Taiwan? Do you think that the United States would ever actually get into a shooting war with China over Taiwan?
Not under President Trump.
Okay.
Thank God.
No? Okay.
He's not going to do that. He knows too much about Taiwan and China. You know, this is so frustrating trying to talk to people about Taiwan. The only way that you get a war with Taiwan is that if we Americans install missiles and aircraft on Taiwan. In other words, we Americans, it's our missile batteries that threaten the mainland, our aircraft that are flown by us. We go there in great numbers. Then you're going to get a war with Taiwan. Otherwise, no, there's not going to be a war with Taiwan. There are two major parties that vie for power on Taiwan. One's called the Kuomintang, and that's Chiang Kai-shek's old party. And then there's a second party that I won't try to pronounce. And that one is essentially historically pro-Japanese and now very pro-American. The president is from the pro-American party, but the parliament is currently dominated and controlled by Chiang Kai-shek's old party. Well, what's the difference? Chiang Kai-shek's old party wants unification with the mainland. In other words, Taiwan tomorrow morning could vote itself into China. No one in Taiwan is interested in going to war. Now, why haven't they already done it? Well, because you have these lingering elements that see benefit from pushing hostility towards China. I don't think it's going to last much longer. One of the things that we discussed a few years ago when Trump was in power was let's not ship any more technology over there because we could wake up tomorrow morning and find that the technology we sold to Taiwan is sitting in China. So that is not going to happen. The other thing is we don't understand the history. Taiwan was the unsinkable aircraft carrier for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Every major invasion of China staged by the Japanese, except for the invasion in Manchuria, came from Taiwan. In other words, they moved forces from Japan, assembled them in Taiwan, and then launched them into China. So the Chinese absolutely will not allow Taiwan to fall into foreign hands again. So as long as there are no foreigners running the show, nobody putting missiles on the ground in Taiwan, there'll be a lot of talk. And every time we take a flotilla through on one of its phony freedom of navigation missions, the Navy loves to do this. Navy desperately needs China. I mean, you're going to have a lot of trouble justifying this enormous surface fleet in the Navy if you don't have a Chinese enemy. And every time they sail through, everybody on Taiwan in the Ministry of Defense says, do you really have to do this? Because whenever you do this, this infuriates the Chinese, and then they mobilize and send their fleet out. So do you really have to do this? And of course, we say, yes, we have to do this. And then you get the Chinese response, the big fleet exercise. Everybody says, oh, China's getting ready to invade. No, it's not. You know, if it comes to it and we put missiles on the place, they'll level it. They won't invade it. It's 100 miles of water. You know, moving things across deep water like that, that's kind of challenging. It's not going to happen. So I don't see any evidence for a war over Taiwan. And the final thing to keep in mind is the Chinese are business people. And they know that if they ended up in a war with Taiwan, or worse yet, tried to invade the place, their business across Asia would tank. Everyone in Asia would be against them. They'd be in the same position today that Israel is in the Middle East, where everybody is uniting to hate you. They don't want to do that. They don't want to risk it. So it's not going to happen.
I mean, China hasn't been traditionally an expansionist government, right?
No, not at all, except when they were ruled by the Mongol dynasties.
Right.
And that's usually what somebody points to, and they fail to point out that over the last 500 years, I think something like 380 of those years, they were ruled by foreigners. Mongolian, Turkic Mongols, and then of course Europeans, and then finally Japanese. So they're a little sensitive to that issue.
Okay, and your advice is close the border. This is how you fight off the problems with the Chinese. Secure our ports and coastlines, and then you look at the Chinese in your country and ask why are they there geographically located where they are.
Yeah, and then throw them out. The Chinese throw people out of China all the time. They throw American citizens out. They throw Japanese out. By the way, the Japanese have a really, really incredibly effective surveillance network of spies inside China. So they get thrown out all the time. The Chinese expect you to react that way.
Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York. Co-host
direct Reimagine US. I'm being facetious, of course, about this conflict and where we are. Let's talk about this. One of the things, and I took some little notes here. So one of the things I find interesting, I'll start with this, is at Donald Trump's CPAC speech here recently, he said, he was hoping to get a deal within the next week. I find that interesting because I know one of the, I don't remember if it was Keith Kellogg or one of Donald's underlings recently said, yes, Donald Trump sends you, and he says, go get me a deal. And then he calls every I'm being facetious, of course, but he calls every 5 minutes, It says, where's the deal? Where's the deal? In other words, he wants this done yesterday. You know, and people are like, well, I think it's going to take months and maybe 6 months, maybe by spring. But I think Donald Trump wants it done. Yes, if you look at what's happening, how quickly he's moving with his agenda, he wants it done yesterday. So he's saying he wants the deal this week. And I think the reason Donald Trump wants a deal so fast is because of he and his you know, very, very powerful faction of the ruling elite that's working along with him are looking to rethink, to redirect, reimagine U.S. monetary and economic policy, both internally and worldwide. And I think that getting this Russia thing done is a critical part. They see, I think they see this as a hindrance to their world economic policy, and that they want to, not just a hindrance, but I think in a way a critical part, because they see Russia, accurately so, as a very, very potentially a very, very powerful economic ally. And part of that, I think, is they want to get oil prices down in a hurry, and they want to do some negotiating with them. And they also want to deal in the Middle East. So they're trying to tamp down some of the military conflicts so that they can focus on what they're really looking to change, and that is economics. You can agree or disagree with it, but that it seems very apparent that that's the direction they're going. That's the plan here. So let's start here. One of the things that I find it interesting that Donald Trump is doing, and we're going to talk about this whole thing, this NATO. I'm going to set a context for the NATO civil war before I actually get into the civil war. Number one, Donald Trump is rewriting the narrative for the Ukraine project, away from it being a Ukraine project. Now, one can argue that there's a certain falsehood to that, because, for instance, let me give you an example to make my point. So Donald Trump is saying, you know, we gave you all of these weapons and we didn't get anything out of it, and you've got to pay us back, and we spent $350 billion in your country. Basically, we gave it to you, and that Zelensky swindled us out of this money, you know, and he lied and he played Joe Biden like a violin, like a fiddle, as they say, et cetera, right? So that part of the narrative is what? That this wasn't a Ukraine project, that it wasn't a proxy war, that the United States didn't make this happen, that the United States didn't look at Ukraine and say, this is going to be a valuable tool. And rather than, one could argue that rather than Ukraine hoodwinking and swindling the United States out of money, the neocons in the US hoodwinked and swindled and bullied Ukraine out of its independence, out of its sovereignty, turned it into weaponized Ukraine. What my argument has been all along, one of the things that the neocons did, the regime change operation, is to weaponize anger. What they do is this: oh man, you guys are really mad at the Russians. Yes, you hate the Russians. Yeah, now we got to stoke that. Now we got to feed that. Now we got to expand that until you're so furious and you hate the Russians so bad that you're irrational. And once we get to the point where you're irrational people do stupid things. So the CIA goes in there, they pump up the Azov and all of these other neo-Nazi groups, and they kind of give them a real grip of power, and they even push their ideology culturally all around the country. They support it. They do everything they can to support the hatred of Russians. They want every Ukrainian to despise Russians for all their worth. And once they get the Ukrainians to be so emotional they hate Russians, they can then weaponize that anger, redirect it towards Russians, and these idiots will go storming right into, a buzzsaw. They will jump in a cage with a bear because they're irrational. So one could argue that the Ukrainians were victims, and that a particular segment of their society was weaponized against the entire country to the detriment of the entire country, and then it was thrown into a wood chipper. Once they got the country where they wanted, they threw the whole damn country into a wood chipper, right? Okay, that's my interpretation of the long-term, from Ukraine project from the 1950s, after World War II, when the CIA was in there, then all the way to the, the Orange Revolution or whatever it was in 2003, 4, 5, up at that time, 2014. It was all a process of weaponizing a country against the interests of the country. Now, what is Donald Trump doing? In order to do the things he wants to do and ask the things he's asked, he has to rewrite that narrative. His narrative is so what he does is this: he accepts certain truths. He accepts that, look, the issue of NATO expansion is real, and that's at the root of the problem. So he tacitly kind of accepts that, right? And that gives credibility to the Russians' arguments. But what does it do? It helps Trump get out of it faster, because by acknowledging that the Russians have some legitimate claims and some legitimate rights, it gives him the ability to negotiate with the Russians, to say to the American people, I had to give the Russians something because this and that, because what happened to them was unfair. They have some legitimate rights. He can't negotiate with the Russians and get this thing over like he wants it over if he does not acknowledge that the Russians have some legitimate rights, and then otherwise he doesn't have any grounds to meet them for negotiations and to give them something. As we say in Zen, the tiger and the shark shall never fight, for they have no common ground. If you want to negotiate with someone, you got to have common ground. And if you don't have common ground, rhetorically and from a narrative perspective, you have to create the common ground. A lot of people don't understand that, right? If you're negotiating with a guy and the guy's, got a gun on you, he's got hostages, whatever, right? You want to start blah, 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 blah. And at some point you say, yeah, look, we can work this out. And I'm going, your name, Bill. Now I've associated, I'm a human being. I'm Garland, I'm Chris, I'm Dave, I'm Bill. Harder to shoot somebody and more. And I've created, we're both human beings and we both have a name, and now we can talk and I can negotiate a little bit better, right? I got to create some common ground with this guy who's just got a gun on me, on the other hostages. Once I create common ground with him, it gives me an ability to talk with him. Our minds start to lock in on concepts. I'm kind of emotionally and intellectually mirroring him a little bit. I create ground for mirroring. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the depths of hostage negotiations, but you get my point. Donald Trump had to create some common ground with the Russians rhetorically and narratively. So number one, he now has to take a turn and say, the Ukraine, here's the way it works. Ukraine is, he's basically saying Ukraine is an independent sovereign nation. Under his narrative, Ukraine is still an independent sovereign nation to some extent, but it's an irresponsible one. It's a petulant child. It's a stupid one. And therefore, since it's like this, it's like dad saying, look, son, you live in my house and I bought you a car when you turned 17 and I buy your clothes and I'm paying for your school. I have a right to have some say in your life. If you're doing something that's really stupid, you need to cut that out, right? So it's dad saying, I contribute to your whole life. I keep you going. And now I say, you shouldn't do this. I'll do what I want, Dad. And then Dad's reminding you, wait a minute, man, you live in my house, dude. You used the foul language at your mother. You said you raised your voice at your mother. And I said, don't raise your voice at your mother. But I can do what I want now, Dad. I pay all the bills here. That car sitting in the driveway I bought. Your clothes on your back I bought. Everything you do, I've helped you. And so you're going to go to college in another year. You want me to help you. So you're going to have to take, I'm dad. I'm not just a guy on the street. You're going to have to listen to me. We got to have some transactional here. If I'm going to do everything for you as a father, you're going to have to be responsible. And when I tell you can't raise your voice at your mother, that means you can't raise your voice. That's the kind of problem you have with boys when they start feeling they're, young and they're, Mom, you can't tell me what to do. They may do that with mom before they do with dad. Because dad might, things may go bad with dad a little bit more. Anyway, so my point is, he's creating a narrative where Ukraine is a petulant child and Donald Trump has to come in, the responsible adults, which would be Trump and Putin, come in and fix this. But not just Ukraine. Additionally, the EU is the same thing. Because what does Donald Trump say? They're like, how come you're not including us? And Donald Trump is like, you had 3 years to get a deal. He said that. He said, you had 3 years and you screwed it up. right? You were irresponsible. You weren't good at what you were supposed to be doing, right? You had 3 years to get a deal and you couldn't get a deal. A half-baked negotiator could have got a deal and you didn't get a deal. Now, the truth of it is they did get a deal and the US stopped in and flopped it, right? The truth of the EU is there were voices in the EU saying perhaps we should be a little, more responsible here. And the Biden administration stomped them out, overthrew them. Robert Fico got shot 10 or 15 times. I mean, they literally tried to take the guy out, let's be honest. So the bottom line is, in order to accomplish his goals, Trump is getting rid of the narrative. He's destroying the narrative that there was a Ukraine project, that Ukraine was a project that the neocons representing the United States. So I could say the neocons, but the neocon faction, the United States utilized Europe, sacrificed the European economy, sacrificed the economy and the lives of Ukraine to use it as a tool against Russia. So the new narrative is the Ukrainians were an irresponsible country and they wanted a war against Russia, and the United States financially sponsored it, and we got nothing out of it. And the Europeans are a bunch of idiots and boneheads, and they went along with Ukraine. And now dad, the father, has to come in. Now the adults in the room has to come in and fix it. Now, a narrative like that works quite well because there's an air of truth to it, right? Not to the overall narrative that, that ignores the fact that this was a Ukraine project, right? But there's an air of truth to where we are now, in that the Ukrainians are extremely irresponsible and the EU leaders are extremely irresponsible, as is obvious by so many things. They just make themselves look like blithering idiots every day of the week. So what Trump has on his side to support that narrative is that the Ukrainians currently are not responsible actors. They're not good faith actors. The EU is currently not responsible good faith actors. So when he says these people have not been responsible good faith actors for the last 3 years, well, yeah, but neither has the US. The US has been leading this irresponsible bad faith movement, but he just ignores that. And it works because the US and Russia right now are clearly the adults in the room, are clearly the most rational. Now, from the Russians' perspective, what do they care? What do they care? If I'm bargaining with you, what do I care? The narrative you have to use. The Russians are pragmatic. The Russians are very bureaucratic, pragmatic kind of people. If you want to put your pen to paper, and it's going to go to the UN, it's maybe a treaty will go through to the Senate. I'll get an actual treaty, which in the United States, a treaty that's ratified by the Senate has the effect of being law, right? Of being law of the land. So if I think I can get a deal with Trump, and now Trump's ready to move on and do some things economically, look, the Russians are going to play the Trump to some extent. The Russians are now saying, yeah, we got to do business with Elon Musk, right? Well, you know what the Russians are going to do? They're going to play Trump and Elon Musk like a fiddle, but not in a negative way to take advantage of them, right? They're not trying to play them in a fiddle so they can blow up the United States or steal all the U.S.'s stuff. They're trying to play them like a fiddle so they can get the best deal that they can, right? Here's my perspective. I'm trying to buy, which I did a while back, a used pickup. I said, I wanted a pickup truck. I can't afford a new pickup. My God, who the hell can pay that? So I get an old pickup, but it's a pickup, a 2013. But when I got the pickup, I wanted the best deal I could get for a pickup because, as you know, people like us, that's why somebody like us buys a used pickup. Like I've talked to the people in the chat, maybe not all of you, but a lot of us. If we want to pick up, it's going to have to be a 2013 pickup because who the hell can afford $90 million for a pickup today, or most anything else? My buddy just bought a 2016 Toyota Highlander, and I'm like, it's a nice vehicle right there. Got a good quality vehicle, got a good price, has 120,000 miles on it. You paid like 15, 14 grand. Limited with everything on it. Excellent. Good deal, right? That's what working class people can afford now. A 2015 Toyota, a 2013 friggin' Ford pickup truck. Now you're talking, this is what people like us somehow scramble around of enough pennies to get. Okay. My point being, when you're making the deal with that guy to buy that used pickup truck, you're going to, hey, this is all, man. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're going to have to pay $100,000 for a pickup. You're I trust you. Oh, this is good. You got a lot of nice pickups. I want to be friends with the guy. I want to do everything I can. Give him a sad story, limp like I got a bad back. You know, I used to be a police officer. Oh, thank you for your service. Any game I can play. Because I want to get, if I can get another $500 or $1,000 off of that used pickup truck, I ain't a rich guy. I have a lot of money. Just a working class guy like the rest of you guys. And I got to save every penny that I can, right? So my point is, I ain't hating on Trump. And I ain't hating on the Russians for playing these games. I respect them. Trump wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. He's going to go in here and rewrite the narrative to suit him so he can get the deal he wants with the Russians. The Russians are going to say, you're great, you're awesome, you're brilliant, Trump. Elon Musk, we need to do deals with you. They're going to do what they got to do to get the best deal. That is smart. That's what the Russians are doing. That it's obvious a deal. That's what the Trump crew is doing. Everybody, they both want a deal. They both know it's time to get a deal. So they're just saying, what can I do to get the best deal that I can possibly get? Hello. I can't disrespect that. Play the game. The other side has to be smart enough to recognize what you're doing, and they got to counter it. And in the end, everybody wants a deal anyway. I wanted to buy the pickup truck. He wanted to sell the pickup truck. At some point, the transaction is going to happen. I'm getting a pickup truck. He knows what I'm trying to do, and I know he's trying to eat too. He's the guy that sells the pickup truck, a little old side of the road place near me that sells pickup trucks, and I know the guys there, and I know they're trying to eat too. So I'm trying to save a few bucks. They're trying to put food on the table. We can get a deal, right? The Russians, they don't want a nuclear war. They don't want a bunch of goons running around on their border. Trump wants to get an economic deal so he can move forward. Hey, everybody's trying to eat, bro. We're all just trying to eat, right? Let's get a deal. Let's play the game. Meanwhile, you got the Azov battalion in the EU. But let's hit a couple other things about this before we get to those friggin' mooks. Anyway, so one of the other advantages of Trump's narrative, right? Another advantage of Trump's narrative is quite simple. By rewriting the narrative that Ukraine and the EU are the irresponsible partners here, and that they dragged the US into something that the US should never have been in, and then they soaked this dry and they played Joe Biden like a fiddle, right? And they took him to the cleaners, okay? It's like if the US was a corporation, the guy who ran the corporation before was an idiot, and therefore you just played him, and now I run the corporation, and I got to try to recoup as best I can all the things that the former guy, that this idiot did wrong, right? By doing that, they're going to try to get Ukraine to pay twice, right? Number one, okay, you got 350 billion out of it. Now, no doubt, plenty of it was stolen and pilfered. There ain't no question about it. But a lot of it went to where? Ukraine. No, it didn't. It went to Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, you name it, right? So the US, using the argument that they were buying weapons for Ukraine, took money out of the US Treasury and it went straight to General Dynamics, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin. Ukraine didn't see a dime of a lot of that money, right? So they're buying stuff. Okay. So the money went into the coffers of US corporations on so-called behalf of Ukraine. So the US already got that money once. Trump wants it back a second time. We spent, an example, let's say we gave 50 billion to Raytheon, right? It stayed in the US, never left our shores. But according to Trump, it, quote, went to Ukraine because it was on behalf of Ukraine. Now he's saying to Ukraine, we took 50 billion out of our treasury, we gave it to Raytheon. Raytheon's got it. It's all here in the US. We want you to give us that 50 billion back in our treasury. Ukraine, under Trump's, the auspices of Trump's narrative, Ukraine's got to pay twice. And you know what? And if you think about it, okay, again, let's not be moral here. Trump and Witkoff and these guys, they're New York City real estate guys, which means they know how to play with the mafia. You gotta be, you ain't gonna build in New York or run a restaurant or something unless you deal with the mafia. They understand the power dynamic. And as P.T. Barnum said, it's a crime against God and nature to allow a sucker to keep his money. If you got a sucker, you got to take his money, because if you don't, somebody else is going to take it. And if you're weak, they're going to take your money. They're going to take your money. They're going to take your lunch money. They're going to take everything. You're in a weak and compromising position. What do the wolves do? They're chasing after the herd, the lions, and one of the herd is slower or smaller or has a limp. Ah, bad news for you, buddy. There's these antelope running away, but one of them he's just trying to bound, but he's got a bad leg because a crocodile bit it a week or two ago, right? I mean, he's recovering, but he's not as fast as he could be because, how they've gone through the water. A crocodile grabbed his leg, yanked a little bit, so he's got a little bit of a limp. So the rest of the antelope can run at 35 miles an hour. He's 22, 23. What do you think the lions are going to do? Hey, that poor antelope, he's got a bad leg. Perhaps we should give him a deal. Give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's be fair and chase one of the young male antelopes who's in excellent condition. It'll be a little harder to get. No, that ain't the way it works in the wild. Those little lions are rubbing their hands together. They got out a knife and fork and they've got their napkin down. They said, man, I got bad news for you, buddy. You are coming. Guess who's coming to dinner? That's the way it goes, right? All right. And that's real estate in New York. You ain't got the power. You know what I mean? You're going to have to, and the weak suffer what they must, right? That's how it goes, right? The strong, however that song goes, I mean, that old quote goes, like the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. The weak suffer what they must. That's how Trump and Witkoff and these guys think. So they're looking at Ukraine and they're like, yeah, where's the Ukraine project? Sure. Were you taking advantage of? Sure. But I'm a wolf or a lion. And you, sir, are an antelope with a bad hind leg. I think we know how this story ends, how this movie ends, right? And the hyenas and the buzzards all start circling around because they know the game, right? They got to eat too. So they're like, boy, there's a bad antelope. There has been studies now, and you can look online and find it, that apparently crows will work in tandem with wolves. They'll fly around and find some deer, and they'll fly back to the wolves, and they'll be like, hey, dude, I ain't trying to, snitch. Don't call me a snitch or anything like that. But I'm just saying there might be some deers over in that meadow to the left, a couple hundred yards over there, and one of them's got a lip. Now, I may be stretching that a little bit, but you know what I mean? So there are now actual stories in the wild of animals working together where the crows, once the wolves get finished, the crows come in and get a little bit, and they're like, look, we might as well help this guy out. Let's go down to, we're all trying to eat here, bro. We're all trying to eat. You see Poland, right? This guy, Duda, Mr. Neocon, we're with the EU, we're standing up against Putin, all this kind of stuff. The other day, the CPAC, where the Conservative Political Action Committee, where Trump is, and he's giving his talk, who's there? Duda. Duda's like, well, EU, I was with you guys. We're pals. We were man. When Biden was in, I was all together. We got to take on the Russians, this and that. There's missiles coming around, and hey, it looks like it came from the Russians. We got to do something against the Russians. Trump comes over. What's Duda doing now? Rats jumping off a sinking ship. Well, I think we might need a peace deal. Look, what is Duda thinking? The carcass of Ukraine will be chewed up. I'm trying to eat too, man. When the lions come in, Putin, look, let's face it, the bear and the eagle. When the bear and the eagle shows up and they chew on this carcass, there's going to be a few scraps left for me. I'll move into Western Ukraine. I'll take what I want. I'll get a little bit of scraps left. He understands the game. They're all trying to eat. Right? So now Duda has reversed course and he's going to go along with the narrative. If Trump says, we got to take some people off of the Russian border, what do you think Duda is going to fight him? Dude, Duda has done a 180 and Duda's going to be, that's a great idea. Perhaps I can give you a hand, Donald Trump. Let's work together. We'll get a deal here. He'll probably I bet if you go to Duda's office, he's probably got he had a picture of Zelensky. He's pulled it down and he's got a picture of Putin up now. Hey, it was like in the Outlaw Josie Wales, right? And it was during the Civil War, or right after the Civil War, I guess, right after the Civil War. And this guy had this business on the Missouri River, and he would had a little ferry kind of thing, and he would get people back and forth across the river, right? And then when the northern soldiers would come up, he'd sing the battle hymn of the Republic, and he'd take them across. Then a bunch of former or current southern soldiers would come in. He'd start singing Dixie, right? Whoever was there, the dude was trying to eat. He didn't have any friends. That's the way power dynamics work. And the idiots and clowns in the EU don't get it yet. But I think Duda gets it. And Duda's going to be, hey, man, Putin. I've always been friends with Putin. He's a nice guy. I mean, come on, maybe in the past we had a few words, but hey, sometimes things change and you move forward with the times. Duda is going to. Somebody said I never get Garland Live notification. Yeah, that's because they don't send them out. They don't send them out. But at any rate, but click the bell and do what you can. Hope for the best. At any rate, so the truth is, if you get to it, did Ukraine make a bad decision to go to war with Russia? Sure. But it wasn't their decision, because I'll put it like this. I think it was 2012-13, 20% of Ukrainians wanted to join NATO. So the US didn't care. So the Ukrainians didn't make a bad decision. The US made a decision for them. The Ukrainians do not have agency and haven't had agency, but Trump doesn't care about that crap. It's about a narrative. In a way, it's similar to the Biden administration, because they create a narrative that they can operate in, and they utilize that narrative to their own ends, right? The difference with Trump's narrative is this. The Biden's narrative was pure fantasy, and they had no end game. Yes, we're going to take out Russia. They didn't have an end game. There's no way. What are they going to do? Go fight Russia with US troops? That wasn't an option. What are they going to do? Get rid of all of their coffers, get rid of all of their ammunition, all of their money, their ammunition, their everything. And once they're as weak as they can possibly be at the end of this thing, and Russia has won, then go in and fight Russia once you're weak and worn out. They didn't have a plan. Trump's got a plan. That's the difference. He's creating a narrative, but his narrative has an end game. And the end game is, we're going to deal and ally with Putin. They want to ally with the Russians for economical purposes. And in order to do that, they've got to get this stumbling block out of the way. Keep in mind, that's what it is to Trump. This is a problem. How soon can we get this done? He's probably screaming at his people, why haven't you gotten me a deal yet? I got plans here. Big plans. I got financial, I got economic plans. I got stuff I'm trying to do. Where's my deal, man? Right? So he's pressuring his people to get a deal. And the Russians are like, okay, we're going to carefully work it, and we're going to carefully write out exactly what we want, and then we're going to give it to you, and then you can review it. The Russians ain't in no hurry. The Russians have continued to bash the crap out of the Ukrainian army. They continue to smash the Ukrainian government into dysfunction. They continue to watch everything crumble. So the Russians are moving slow. They're taking their time. They're not in a rush to get a deal, because they're winning. And all they do is win. And so what? Yeah, we'll get a deal. Let's take our time. Old Trumpy, what's the rush? We can get a deal, man. Let's sit down. Let me write out what we're going to do. And they're writing out slowly. N-A-T-O. And Trump's like, would you hurry up and write the document so I can sign it? 2025 February 20. It's going to take them 8 months to write that document out. They're like, yep, we're going to write the document out. And Trump's like, wait, I got an idea. Why don't I just sign the agreement and you can write it out later, and then we'll get on to the money part. Because that's what he's trying to do. This is about money. That Ukraine project is DEAD, done, finished, over. Because Trump wants a deal with the Russians. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to make a guess. Could be any number of things. Trump wants to deal with the Russians because he understands the power of Russians' diplomacy, of that Russians' international power is enormous right now, diplomatically, economically, etc. And Trump wants to ally with that. I don't think he wants to fight it. He wants to ally with that. He wants a good deal with Russia so he can use his deal with Russia as leverage for other deals. Now in Saudi Arabia, hey, let's get something done. We need to talk with the Saudis. We need to get a deal. He wants a deal in the Middle East. I think he wants to get that deal with Ukraine so he can get the deal with the Middle East. The Saudis have made it clear, look, only thing that's going to happen here is we got to have a two-state solution. Whether you agree with 1, 2, whatever, that's up to you. The Saudis said, if you want normalization, you got to get me a two-state solution. Trump knows the Russians are very, very powerful diplomatic force in the Islamic world. And on all sides, the Gulf states love them, the Shiites love them, the Russians have the Africans, you name it. Everybody, the Russians historically, if you look around the world, they have tremendous relations because they treated people with business dignity and respect. And during the colonial times, they took the right side and fought against colonialism. Okay, so they got a lot of diplomatic capital and economic capital because they got wheat. And they got oil and they got stuff to offer. And if you're a country, you need stuff. And whatever it is, Russia can offer it. So if you're a country X and you talk to Putin, Putin can be like, what do you need, bro? Man, we're having trouble getting wheat. Yeah, we can talk. Anything else? Yeah, gas is a little, yeah, we got that too. How about some other foods, vegetables? Yeah, nickel. We got nickel. That's all we got. We got nothing but nickel, man. We got plenty of that. So Putin, if you have a country and you need something, commodities, he's the commodity dude. You know what I mean? He's the dude that's got everything you need. So things that we can't offer, Putin can offer. And he's got alliances. Oh, I'm having trouble with China. Yeah, I'm tight with China. Yeah, having some problems with India. What's Putin going to say? Yeah, India, we're like this. You give them a good deal on oil. We sell them lots of weapons. Talk to me here. So Trump realized the importance of the Russians as a commodity and a diplomatic hub. And he wants to be able to use that as leverage, not necessarily as leverage to punch anybody, but as leverage to work with the Russians to get the deals that he wants economically, be it with Saudi Arabia, be it with China, whatever the case may be. So he's trying to get that deal. And I think the Russians are going to play it for all they're worth. And afterwards, because there's security. Look, if you're Russia, what's number one? Every 100 years, these jackasses from the West got to come up through Ukraine and attack you. Hey, what's happening? Charles the 12th of Sweden. We're attacking Russia. Who next? Napoleon. Russia's going to get it. The Crimean War. Hey, World War II. And now these knuckle-dragging apes in the Biden administration, the Newlands and the Boltons of the world, have been spoiling for a fight ever since 1991, and they finally got it. So if you're the Russians, first and foremost, you got everything you need. You just want some security on your border. That's what the Russians are looking for, right? Now, let us continue. So the bottom line is this. Now that we've set all of that stuff up, let us move on to the deal. And what are the impediments to the deal? As I've said, and I think I made it clear, it's obvious the Russians want a deal that benefits them, not just any deal, but a deal that benefits them. And if you're the Russians and you listen to the rhetoric of the Trump administration and you see the domestic economic power that Donald Trump has, massive economic power, massive political power right now. He won in a landslide. His numbers are high. He's doing all kinds of crap, right? He's never been in a better situation, right? More and more Americans are saying we want a deal. We're scared of nuclear war. He's looking good right now. Trump is at the zenith, right? He is in a crescendo of his power. An American president couldn't have. There's other things Trump's doing I absolutely disagree with, sure. But realistically speaking, the man is extremely powerful right now politically, and from a domestic perspective, right? He can get a ham sandwich through the Senate right now. Anybody he can put there. He can say, I've decided Garland's going to be the secretary of secretaries. Guess what? It'll go through. Ain't nobody challenging him. So right now, this is an opportunity where Donald Trump can literally have a treaty with the Russians. And he can get that treaty ratified in the Senate because he's got the votes for it. Come on. He got through JFK, Cash Patel, and Tulsi. There's nothing he can't get through the Senate, right? He gets a treaty. It's literally now, it becomes U.S. law. This is the perfect time. If you're the Russians, you've never had a better time. You want to get the treaty and the treaty you want. So, and in a way, one could make an argument that if you're the Russians, you might want the treaty kind of fast because dynamics could change. And before dynamics change, you know, the apes and the Azov apes end up doing something. Europe, God only knows what they do. You want to get this thing done beforehand, right? The other thing is this. There's an argument out there that Donald Trump wants to either get a deal or walk away. Will he walk away somewhat? Potentially, but not really. Let me tell you why. I don't think he will. In order to fully execute what he wants to execute, an alliance with Russia, a diplomatic and economic alliance with Russia, he needs a peace deal. And again, a peace deal with Russia gives him massive domestic power too, and allows him to align with one of the most powerful nations. Because in the world, what did we have before? We had Russia and China versus the US. What does Trump want? Russia, China, the US as the three superpowers. What he wants to be is really, you know, the most powerful amongst three equals. He wants to say we're all equal superpowers, but we're the most powerful one, right? But he doesn't want to push it too far. He wants, hey, what did he say the other day? Oh, China this, China that. And he says, and Xi is my good friend. I like the guy, right? He's great, wonderful, best of friends, right? He wants a deal. He wants to be him and Xi and Putin together because I believe Donald Trump wants the time to come. He gave hints of this in the past. China, if you want to sell cars in the US, you have to build them here. And what can he do? He can then rebuild the US auto industry by aligning it with China. Okay, we'll build BYD cars here, and we can now open factories back up in Ohio and Michigan and blah, blah, and build these cars to go around the world. In the United States, kind of get some of the power off of China's industry, and then we can kind of build our industries, right? That's his game plan. And I might add, well, let's continue. So he's got plans here, I think. You could agree with them or not agree with them. They got some holes in them. They got some strength in them. But that's what Trump wants. He's about economic changes. So now what happens? He's getting pissed at the Europeans. I think ultimately Europeans have to acquiesce because right now, if you're the Trump administration, what are you saying? I want a deal. Europeans want a deal. I mean, the Russians want a deal. The Russians and the Americans are on the same side. They both want a deal, and they both got plans afterwards, right? But you got these Europeans, and they're going to get on your nerves. Annalena Baerbock, of all crazy people, the other day was talking about, you know, basically threatening the Trump administration. Not a smart idea. Saying that, you know, there will be a price to pay if the Americans don't go along, and if they try to force peace on us. Now think about this. The European leadership is now, you will not force peace on us. Damn you, we want war. It's war we're here for. And you will not force peace on us. Our values do not allow for peace. Okay, fine. And here's the real problem they have. The real problem that Europe has. Alligator mouth. Use one of my dad's saying, an alligator mouth and a Tweety bird ass, right? You got a lot of yap. But can you back it up? Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, as I said, Witkoff and Trump, the boys from Trump's from Queens. I think Witkoff might be from the Upper East Side. The boys from New York are going to pay you a visit. And when they pay you a visit, they're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Witkoff will make a bill like you did in Netanyahu. I don't want to hear about your crap. For Saturday, I'm meeting you today. At some point, Europe is yapping, Europe is griping, Europe is crying. They're making a lot of noise. At some point, this is where Trump is. I'm going to guarantee you this is what's going to happen. Because this is the way it works. This, like I said, New York, you make a deal with the mafia, you make deals with the mafia. And the mafia comes to you. At some point, they're going to have to push you, right? Some guy, I remember when I taught the organized crime, there was a story about this guy owned a strip joint, and the mafia said, we want 50% ownership of it. And the guy refused to sell, and they paid him a visit, and they said, this is your last chance. The guy's like, nah, I'm not going to sell. Then I don't have to tell you what happened to this guy. The mafia felt like this: you're disrespecting us. When we say we want 50%, you can sell us the whole thing or 50%. And apparently It was one of the hitmen admitted that before they pumped 3 bullets into the guy, they said to him, "We're trying to eat. You don't want us to eat. You're not going to let us eat." Right? And they paid him a visit, and they ended up with 100% of the strip joint because his next of kin coughed up the strip joint. They knew you're playing with the mafia. Come on. Bottom line is, at some point, the Trump people are going to get a deal with the Russians. And when they do, they'll call a meeting with Starmer and maybe the whole crew, right? Schultz or whoever the hell's in charge. And they're going to say, look, we got a deal with it. It's a good deal. We like this deal. We need you to sign on to the deal. And we need you not only to sign on to the deal. No, not to reluctantly sign on to the deal. Not to say, yeah, okay, we'll take it. We need you to enthusiastically support this deal because it ain't going to work unless you enthusiastically support it. We need you to go back to your respective parliaments and say it's a good deal. We need you to go to the BBC and Le Monde and DW and tell all of them, we need you to support this deal. We need you to support this deal. We expect you to support this deal. Now with Starmer, Macron, whoever the hell says, we're not doing that, we're not forcing that on us, then you push the mafia where they say we're trying to eat and you won't let us eat. And somebody calls Trump, hey, I talked to Macron, I talked to Starmer, Macron's wiggling, I think we can get him. Starmer doesn't want to act right. What is the boss? Freaking guy, he's a mook, huh? He's busting my chops here. Huh? This guy's a freaking mook. That's what he says, right? That's when they go, the Don, that's what they used to call him, you know, Don Corleone. The Don says, this guy's a friggin' mook. He's busting my chops here. And they go back. At that point, think about this. The power dynamic was set up by Joe Biden when he blew Nord Stream. Right? When he cut the Russians off from, the Europeans off from, sunflower seed oil, all the things they get from Russia, they're cut off from. And at that point, Witkoff or whoever can now go back to the Macrons and everybody in the world and say, you know, this thing can work out real well for us. I talked to the Russians. They're willing to supply you with sunflower oil and gas and all that. Talk to the Russians. The Russians, they don't like you. They may not give you as good an economic deal, but they're willing to sell you this stuff again. They said, we talked to them and they said, okay, we'll sell these friggin' mooks, whatever it is they need, right? They don't like it. They call you mooks, but they're willing to sell it to you. We're willing to sign a deal. However, if you have a problem with the deal, you know, you get everything from us now. You're getting LNG and oil and all kinds of things. And you know, a lot of our friends provide you with oil. Qatar, you're getting gas from them. The Russians are good friends with the Algerians. Getting a lot of gas from them. You're getting oil, gas from this. We got a lot of friends out here that's providing you with a lot of nice things, including us. It would be very unfortunate for all of us if you didn't sign that deal. Because us, along with our friends, may not be able to provide you with some of these goods anymore. The LNG, we got ships coming back and forth with LNG. You know, it's rough seas out there. Some of the ships could get confused and turn around and go back to port. Algeria, you know, they got a lot of customers for gas and people are selling you wheat, sunflower seed oil. We've talked to various countries, the Qataris. They sell you a lot of gas too, but they got a lot of customers out here. We just say it would be unfortunate for all of us if you were not to go along with this deal. And pretty much all of the things that you need to survive as a civilization were to stop. Might I add, Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen, they sell 1 or 2 cars in the US. Be unfortunate if they weren't allowed to sell any. Bosch, they sell all kinds of stuff, speakers, parts, electronics, refrigerators, you name it. You don't sign this deal, we're really going to have a difficult time accepting things from countries that are so problematic. You guys were just trying to eat. You don't want us to eat. What happens to people when they try to stop us from eating? So my point is this: the time will come, the yappy mouth chumps in Europe, these clowns will be put in their place. Now, that's the nice way. I suspect Witkoff will grab them by the little their little spindly little necks and throw them in the floor. Shut up. You're taking the deal. That's what it's going to amount to. We don't want to take the deal. Shut up. You're taking the deal. You think Joe Biden was bad to you when he blew Nord Stream? We ain't going to blow Nord Stream. We're going to blow everything. And not physically blow it, but we're going to cut you off. Now, effective tomorrow, here's the piece of paper. We need your signature on this piece of paper. And not just your signature. We need your personal guarantees that you're going to support these deals and that you're going to do everything we need you to do to make these deals. And you're not going to go back. You're not going to gripe and whine and say it's a bad deal. You're not going to do that. You're going to support them 100% and move forward for peace. We need your personal guarantees that you'll do that. And if that doesn't happen by tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., you can call BMW, you can call Land Rover, Peugeot, any of them. Call them all and say, bad news, guys. The U.S. has cut off all imports. And you won't be able to do it anyway because the Russians have cut off gas. And the Americans have cut off gas. And the Qataris have cut off gas. And the Algerians have cut off gas. And all of America's allies. And, you know, China really wants this deal to happen too. And they said, you know, the ships that are rushing over here with these goods could start moving a little slower. So either you commit complete and total economic suicide or you sign this deal. But we'll give you till 8 a.m. tomorrow to think about it. So that's the way the Europeans will be dealt with. They will be dealt with. The European ruling elite will be dealt with for the weak little chumps that they are, for the poodles that they are. When you are nothing but a poodle, you expect to be treated like one. And that's the way they will be treated. Now, next, let's go to the goons. Let's go to the goons. The other part of it is you created these knuckle dragging apes in Ukraine. They could be a problem because you can get a deal with human beings, but some friggin' guy who's goose stepping all over the place with Hitler tattoos all over him, he's not going to be rational. And I think the Russians, put this as gently as I can, the Russians lost 27 million people to these mooks, right? I think the Russians may have a way of dealing with these people if they don't want to work things out, right? I think the Russians have already begun to deal with these people, and the Russians have said denazification. Now, there are various ways you can denazify something. One way, for instance, let's just say you got mice. You can do something. There's things you can put down that mice don't like the smell of, and they'll run away. And you can let the mice run away. You go in and catch the mice one by one. Now, once you catch the mice, you can take them out a long ways away in the woods and release them. It's one option. The other option is not quite as humane, and it has something to do with the mice not surviving the ordeal. All I'm saying is this. The Azov battalion and their ilk, one way or the other, they're going to be dealt with. And I think that at some point, the Trump people may say to the Russians, yeah, we're doing this, that, and the other. And they get a deal. And then Azov Nazis say, we're not going along with the deal no matter what. We're going to fight the deal no matter what. And I think, you know, let's face it, if we're honest with ourselves, Ukraine is crawling with Russian spies. You know that. Zelensky's inner circle, no doubt, is crawling with Russians. I mean, I'm not talking out of sorts. I guarantee you there's probably more Russian spies in Ukraine than there are Ukrainians. They know where the bodies are buried. They know where people are. They know who's who. And if the Russians decided, so this weekend, you know, with Trump people, the Nazi leadership needs to be decapitated this weekend or over the next week, I think they could find a lot and deal with them. I'm a man of great peace. I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. But it is quite possible at some point that the Russians, and look, like I said, they lost 27 million people to these schlumps, right? Can you really get mad with the Russians if they determine that they have to deal with denazification in, shall we say, a hands-on manner, that we may have to turn our heads? Hey, what are the Russians doing? Hey, look over there. Let's take a look over here. I'm just saying, if you ever saw The Walking Dead, there was an instance where one of the, I think it was a 14-year-old girl, and the people who were surviving in this zombie apocalypse, she was a problem. She was making noise. She thought that the zombies were going to be her friends and she could befriend them. And she was doing a bunch of things that put the entire group at great risk. And they knew if they kept her around, it was going to be a problem. And they had a decision to make. It was a decision that none of us would ever want to make, but they had a decision to make. And at some point, they took the poor 14-year-old girl out and they said to her, just look at the flowers. And she looked at the flowers. And that was the last thing she saw. I don't feel good about that, but that's why I like zombie movies. Because in zombie movies, oftentimes you get to a point where there are those kind of moral and intellectual decisions that have to be made, right? Here's the problem we got. We got, let's say, 15 survivors walking around trying to hide from zombies and survive in a zombie apocalypse. We got a 16th person who's going to put the other 15 in jeopardy of all dying. Do you keep the 16th person around knowing the other 15 are probably going to die? Or do you address the situation in a manner that you got to count? At some point you start counting and somebody has to go look at the flowers. So I'm just saying, they're going to get a deal with the Russians. They're going to bully the EU, and they will do what the hell they want, what they're told to do at some point. And the denazification, two things will happen in Kiev, and I think it's already happening. There's no honor amongst thieves. So a lot of these, people who are thieves and criminals and oligarchs in Ukraine will do what Duda's doing in Poland. Hey, Trump and company, come on in. I want to help you with the transition. How can I be of service to you? They're going to deal with the Russians. I always love the Russians. Hey, the Russians are great people. Now they're running the show. There are a lot of people in Ukraine who are very powerful who will just flip and say, all right, hey, new people are in power. How can I make money? How can I survive? How can I keep going? And the knuckle dragging goons and Azov and stuff like that, some of them will be taken for a walk in a meadow and asked to gaze at the flowers. I think that's going to be an issue that happens here and there. So as for Zelensky, he ain't going to have no friends, but we shall see. I do believe that one of the things is that the Trump administration, when they start getting into Ukraine, is going to want info on Biden. They're going to want info on Russiagate. Oh, man, let me just say this. Let me end by saying this. One of the things that I recall, I think it was 2017, and I was on with Lee Stranahan and this other guy, I can't remember his name. And they brought up Russiagate, and I said, the Russiagate hoax, and I said, it ain't a hoax. I said, it's an operation. It's an intelligence operation. I said, in one of these days, when and if the truth comes out about Russiagate, it will make Watergate look like a parking ticket. it will be the biggest scandal in the history of the United States and nothing even close. That was my position in like 2017. It was so glaringly obvious that it was an intelligence operation and it was an attempted coup against the president, well, preemptive coup before he came in. Then once he came in, it was an attempted coup. And then once he got out, they still went after him to do another preemptive coup before he came in again. What an unbelievable operation. And now I think Trump's people are looking to keep digging, and I'm looking forward to that. I hope they do. I want justice. Now, as I said, there's things Trump is doing that I absolutely disagree with. I'm not a libertarian. I don't agree with libertarian politics, so I'm going to dramatically disagree with him on that. But it don't matter whether I disagree with him or not. He's in power and I ain't. And they're going to do him and the libertarian tech bros, and they're not really, they're libertarian, neoliberal, whatever you want to call them, but the tech bros who are in power have made some decisions and they're going to do what they want to do. And whether I like it or not is irrelevant. I'm just going to try to evaluate. So here's what I have to say, everybody. Please hit the like button, number one. Number two, if you can afford it, whether it's Patreon, please. Buy a PayPal. Buy me a coffee is great because you go in there and it's like, hey, what do you do? Buy all of the coffee. How much? 5 beans. How many? Many as you want. And buy me a coffee, you can do like Patreon anyway, also now where you do the buy me a coffee thing, just like Patreon. And then ultimately, it comes out, the thing pops up and says, do you want to make this monthly or do you want to be a monthly subscriber? So if you choose, hey, the great thing about buy me a coffee, you can just do $5 if you want, whatever you want, or you can be just like Patreon. So thanks a lot, everybody. Certainly appreciate this. Share this on all your social media.
I take this opportunity because she's overseas with our daughters to wish a happy birthday to my good wife, Gayatri. She will be on the show later. Thank you, Gayatri, for everything. You brought sunshine on Leith into my life. And I want to remember the death of our good friend, Gonzalo Lira, who we thought was dead and buried as a story, but who has now become the subject of major international discourse and maybe a very significant role in what happens next in Ukraine. Gonzalo Lira was a good friend of ours, and we were amongst the very few good friends of his. People rubbished him, people doubted him, but we always trusted him. And we featured him over and over and over again on the mother of all talk shows. And in fact, he remains the biggest view count of any of our guests. That's how significant a man he was to this show and to the international audience that saw right from the start 3 years ago that all was not what we were being told it was in the battle in Ukraine. Gonzalo Lira was murdered by President Zelensky. When he was asked that today by a journalist, he laughed. But he may not be laughing for long, because the Vice President of the United States is now highlighting how it came to be that an American citizen, a journalist, a blogger, was able to be incarcerated, tortured, and murdered by the United States' closest ally, to whom the United States was giving hundreds of billions of dollars. More of that later. How it came to pass that Joe Biden's embassy in Kiev did jack shit to help a man whom it was their duty to assist. They sat by and may even have given the wink to the murderer Zelensky to kill our good friend Gonzalo Lira. Elon Musk on Twitter, a very powerful man indeed, is now constantly highlighting the fact that Zelensky murdered an American journalist, Gonzalo Lira. Now, of course, we wish that everyone who is now preoccupied by this case had been at all preoccupied by it when it was still possible to save Gonzalo Lira's life. We were the people, and very few others, who beseeched the American government, the Chilean government, any government that could or would, to come to the rescue of this outstanding and brave figure. But nobody was listening then, but they are listening now. And so posthumously, it may very well be that Gonzalo Lira features large, not as life, for he is dead, but large in the immediate future relations between the United States and the Ukraine. But first to Germany. Little soldier Schultz and Anna Baerbock, the foreign minister, could not have been closer to Zelensky. Well, they could have, I suppose, although we never know what goes on behind closed doors. But certainly, they embraced him with all of their hearts. And they've gone the way of so many others who have similarly embraced the deadly Zelensky in the last 3 years. The truth is that Baerbock and Schultz did more concretely, practically, to fuel this disastrous war, which has killed well over 1 million people, hundreds of thousands on the Russian side, 1 million and more on the Ukrainian side, and has cost all of us in treasure an uncountable amount of money. The dislocation that this war has caused in world affairs will be felt for 50, maybe 100 years from now. It is as cataclysmic in its way, in its impact on international relations than any event since the Second World War. It was the German Chancellor then, Angela Merkel, who guaranteed the Minsk II agreement, along with President Hollande, if you remember him, of France, if you remember them. Merkel and Hollande guaranteed that the Minsk II agreements would be implemented, but they both lied and have since admitted it. They have both admitted that Minsk II was a hoax, was a canard, it was a conspiracy against the peace. And as it's turned out, a conspiracy against the people of Germany and France, not to mention the Ukraine and Russia, and indeed more widely too. Merkel and Hollande, if they had been genuine, would have avoided having a war in the Ukraine at all. Minsk II committed the Ukrainian government to autonomy for the Russian-speaking regions of the country and no membership of NATO. Precisely the things that would have stopped this war, would have avoided the loss of at least 1/3 of Ukraine's territory, would have avoided the loss of at least 1.25 million people, would have avoided the wreckage of the economies of the belligerent NATO countries. The wreckage which came home to roost, though not as clearly as it should have in the elections in Germany today. Since little Schultz came to power, he's been funneling money and weapons and diplomatic support and propaganda rhetoric and cracking down on the freedoms of the people of Germany like there was no tomorrow. But certainly tomorrow does not belong to him. He has plunged the SPD, the Labour Party equivalent, take note, Keir Starmer, in Germany, to its lowest vote in the entire history of German democracy. Barely 15% of the electorate voted to re-elect their prime minister. It is an astounding low for a party that was once the natural party of government in the German Republic. This is the party of Willy Brandt. This is the party of Gerhard Schröder. This is the party which dominated post-war German politics for so long. And it has crashed and burned, and it has completely deserved to. To my astonishment, Baerbock's party actually did extremely badly, down almost 10%, but that 14% of the German electorate thought that Anna Baerbock was the answer. That greenery and quackery and wokery and the whole trans agenda was the answer for Germany in its dark hour. Well, frankly, that astounds me. But as I've been saying on here for quite some time, if you put both of these governing parties together, you don't get anywhere near 30% of the vote, and they are now out. Except that the party which has won the election, the CDU, the Conservative Party equivalent in Germany, is no better at all than the outgoing coalition of Schulz and Baerbock. Sound familiar? Sound familiar to you? This two cheeks of the same arse? This false dichotomy, which is presented to voters in Britain, in France, in Germany, and other places in Western Europe too. Does it sound familiar that the only way you can kick out the incumbent government is to elect a government which is as bad, if not worse, than the outgoing coalition? And that is, of course, exactly what happened in Britain on the 4th of July last year. Nobody in their right mind could have voted to re-elect little Rishi Sunak, but the choice was him or Starmer, because the entire electoral process is completely rigged in Germany as in France. The German Nationalist Party, AfD, whose vote doubled in this election, but fell well short of being in the running for a coalition place, it was forgotten by the German state broadcaster in their final roundup on the eve of poll. Of the state of the parties, they forgot to mention the AfD, which doubled its vote and came in second in this election in Germany today. Sarah Wagenknecht, my own choice, if I had one, if I was a voter in Germany, was completely blanked out of the entire election. No debates, no television coverage, no national opinion poll mentioned her. And I've got my fingers crossed that she'll cross the 5% barrier and be in the new German parliament. The parade of transvestites called Die Linke got nearly 15% of the vote. So you can tell that there's still a lot of liberals in Germany. And those that are not liberals are not prepared to vote for anyone that will actually make a difference. And so the downward slide of the powerhouse of Europe, the most important country in Europe, continues and will continue. And as our guest from Germany, former candidate from Hamburg, told us, I think on Wednesday's show, if not last Sundays, he told us, actually, they'll just all stay in government. None of them can govern on their own. Of course, the leader of the CDU, Merz, a former BlackRock executive, yes, BlackRock, he'll be the chancellor, but Schultz and Baerbock will be back as junior partners in a new coalition. Before we had a traffic light coalition, now we have the Afghan flag. Work it out for yourselves. So Germany's crisis will continue unabated. Germany's warmongering will continue unabated. Germany's slide into complete irrelevance in world affairs will continue. And the economic wreckage and the multiple social crises that have accompanied it will, of course, also continue. So expect to see trouble in Germany ahead. Now, when the Israeli Air Force dropped 80 tons of explosives on the head of the leader of the Lebanese resistance, Said Hassan Nasrallah, they probably hoped that that would be the end of the matter. When the resistance was forced by the Lebanese government, not that the Lebanese government could have forced them, but force majeure in that the resistance did not want to create a civil war in Lebanon, which they would have won and would have toppled the other powers in the state in an afternoon, but they have never and do not want to do that. So they agreed to a ceasefire. And in that ceasefire, during that ceasefire, which was broken by Israel more than 1,500 times and was broken again in South Lebanon today, we kept being told, all the most educated fools in the Western polities and mass media, that the resistance was over. They had been decapitated. They had been effectively disarmed, and that they were potentially so weak that they could be pushed out of Lebanese politics in total. Well, they didn't budget on 1.4 million Lebanese people turning up for Hassan Nasrallah's funeral in Beirut today. 1.4 million people in a country of less than 5 million people. That sounds like a pretty healthy share of the vote for the Lebanese resistance to me. This, despite the fact that there was every possibility that Israel could have dropped bombs on 1.4 million people. They flew fighter, bomber, aircraft over the funeral repeatedly and dropped bombs in the south of Lebanon as hundreds of international journalists were gathering for a funeral. But 1.4 million people turned out in support of the late leader of the Lebanese resistance. So I'm going to make a not all that bold prediction here. You have not heard the last of the resistance in Lebanon. That leaves me time only to deal with the latest lunacy of Sir Keir Starmer, who is doubling down and doubling down on his conflict, not just with Putin, but now with Donald Trump. Trump has made clear Ukraine, what's left of it, at the end of this conflict, will never join NATO. But Keir Starmer says today, on the eve of his departure for a meeting with President Trump, that Ukraine will join NATO. He promised it, just like he promised $3 billion pounds sterling every year for 100 years. Who does that? Who knows who's going to be running Ukraine 100 years from now? Who knows who's going to be running Britain? Who knows if either country will still exist in 100 years from now? But Starmer is very much more committed to Ukraine than he is to Britain. And I'm not entirely sure why that should be and why he's given such a free ride for being so. He cut the cold weather payments to our own old age pensioners in order to light up people in Ukraine. He took money from Britain's pensioners and gave it to Zelensky, even though the man and dog in the street knows that Zelensky and his circle are the greatest thieves of the 21st century. They keep getting caught. A low-level official in the Ministry of Defense in the Ukraine, nobody you've ever heard of, not near the top of the tree, was arrested this week with $14 million in cash. They spread it all out on the desk. Well, if that's what you're earning as a low-level official in the Ministry of Defense, just imagine the treasure in the chest of little Zelensky himself. All of that, much more, coming up. Stay tuned. Still dealing with exit polls, but it seems that the curse of Zelensky has struck again, but that the electorate did not have the courage to vote for a change of direction. Is that a fair summary in your view?
I think so. The AFD did pretty well. Obviously, it's a historic breakthrough. They got almost twice as many votes as in the last election, but they didn't do quite as well as they had probably hoped for, particularly after Elon Musk's intervention and all the publicity generated by that interview that he had with Alice Weidel, and then she met Vice President Vance, and all of that was somehow expected to give her party more of a boost. In the end, she kind of ended up with pretty much what she had, a couple of months ago. So I think that's the case. The Christian Democrats have not done particularly well. And, the big surprise so far of this election has been the sudden surge of the Die Linke party, the party of the left, which seemed completely dead and buried after Sarah Wagenknecht had started her own party. But Sarah Wagenknecht had so far doesn't seem to have done as well as it was expected. So you're absolutely right. It does look as if Germany was just going to continue drifting as it has been now, really for 2 decades, ever since the fall of Gerhard Schroeder.
Well, the only two parties that were in the running that offered a different direction were the AFD and the Sarah Wagenknecht group. I'm closer to her, of course. But they have both done less well than they might have expected, and certainly than they might have hoped. So what we have now is a polity in Germany where if you add the Green vote to the so-called left vote of Die Linke, which is not a left vote really because it's pro-war, pro-Israel, pro-censorship, pro-attacks on free speech, pro-Zelensky, and so on. So actually the Greens and them together make about 30% of the vote. So liberalism isn't dead in, and of course, if you add Schultz's vote to that, it's about 45%. And the AFD and the Wagenknecht group are, well, coming in at around 35% of the vote. Merz is the new chancellor, will be the new chancellor, but can't govern on his own. What do you think he'll do next?
Well, I think he's going to try to form a coalition government with the Social Democrats. Whether that will be enough, whether there's enough there to command a majority in the Bundestag, that seems dubious, in which case he's probably going to turn to the Greens, and then essentially you're going to have exactly the same situation as you had when the so-called traffic light coalition, namely you've got these three parties that can't really agree on anything very much, and they will just continue with the same policy on Ukraine, same policy, by the way, also on the Israel's war on Gaza, same policy also on mass migration and their inability to bring that under some kind of control. So, given what the Christian Democrats, and this goes all the way back to Angela Merkel's time, that they somehow they want to create this firewall against the AfD. It means that the Christian Democrats are always prisoners of that kind of neoliberal center-left grouping of the Social Democrats and the Greens. They can't do anything else because there's no, once they made a decision that they're not going to have anything to do with the AfD, then they have no other choice but to go to the Social Democrats and the Greens. I mean, the Free Democrats, it doesn't look like they're going to make it into the Bundestag, but you never know. They always somehow manage to creep over that 5% threshold. But essentially, nothing is going to change, which means that at some point, things are going to get really dire in Germany. Germany continues with its economic decline. Germany continues with its social decline. And this will only be a boost for the AfD because essentially the campaign for 2029 begins tonight.
Now, let's take a look at the SPD, formerly the leading socialist party in Europe. This was a party of which Rosa Luxemburg was, for a time at least, a member. This was a giant of politics not so long ago, and Schultz has taken them to their lowest vote ever. He can't stay on as leader, yes. Can he?
No, he's done. His political career is over. It's hard to see what happens now. This is 16%. 16%, as you say, this is the party of Karl Marx. This is the party of Karl Kautsky, Edward Bernstein. You go through these names of these giants of the European socialist movement, and it's now, and even in more recent times, Willy Brandt, Helmut Schmidt, Gerhard Schroeder. I mean, it is pathetic to collapse into this state. So yeah, this is a total failure and rejection. And you'd have to believe that this decline will continue. I think it's just going to become, one of these small parties that's sort of 5 or 6%. So I think they're finished. But the unfortunate thing, as far as I can see, the unfortunate thing is that the Greens, despite their failures of their economic policies, despite the absolutely catastrophic foreign policy pursued by Annalena Baerbock of antagonizing the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese all at one and the same time. I mean, the idea you're the foreign minister and you're antagonizing, three major powers. I mean, that's your diplomacy. And they're going to, if they are going to join the coalition, they're going to absolutely angle to continue on that job. That foreign ministry, that's the one that the Greens always want to control.
And Merz himself is a former BlackRock executive.
Yep.
Does that tell us everything we need to know about him?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he is, he has the classic profile of a Christian Democrat. He was born in North Rhine-Westphalia, comes from a very prosperous family. He's a Catholic. He has tried, I mean, this is, I think, his third attempt at trying to get to be the leader of the party. He was outmaneuvered by Angela Merkel. And then after he failed with Merkel, he went and made an awful lot of money. He worked as a corporate lawyer, and then he was on the board of innumerable corporations. I mean, just go through the list of all the major corporations that he served on the board of. Very, very wealthy man, absolutely extremely wealthy. And that's who he is. He's a neoliberal. He wrote a book in favor of venture capitalism. I mean, his model of capitalism is vulture capitalism. Essentially the BlackRock model. You buy up companies, you shed your workforce, and then you sell them off. I mean, that's his model of capitalism.
Well,
it's not the German the market economy. I mean, it's definitely the opposed to what Germany used to stand for.
Well, exactly. It was once a model of kind of hybrid capitalism, and will now be a Germany where the vultures are circling. Let's take a look at the European scene as a whole, George. I'd love your take on this. I mean, Trump and Vance and Musk are going through the Europeans like a dose of salt, aren't they?
Right. They really are. Because this grouping has absolutely driven Europe into the most abject, humiliating role that it's ever had. Totally lacking any independent agency, totally lacking any kind of a distinctive foreign policy, a kind of a particularly European view of the world. They've completely, rented out their foreign policy to the United States. I mean, when they destroyed, the Americans openly boasted that they destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, and then Sergeant Schultz, I call him Sergeant Schultz, was stood there next to Biden, and he had nothing to say. Your great ally, your great liberator, and was boasting that he was basically driving your economy into the toilet. Well, if you allow yourself to be treated like a doormat, then people will take you to be the doormat. So, of course, Trump and Vance have no respect at all for Europe. And they expect the Europeans to fall into line. Just do as we say, and don't start coming here with all kinds of programs of your own. No, you do as we say. And the Europeans have brought this on themselves. And the more that they complain about Trump, and Trump also remembers that many of these same leaders openly rejoiced after 2020, and some of them actually plotted against him. Like Keir Starmer sent his flunkies to campaign on behalf of Kamala Harris. Trump hasn't forgotten that, so there's absolutely going to be payback now.
But to what extent can they throw a spanner in the works? I mean, they're talking big, some bigger than others, Starmer biggest of all. But if Trump is really bent on a negotiation with Putin and an agreement with Putin over the fate of the war, to what extent can these Europeans hold an independent position and make it count?
It's very hard to see. They could, in theory, send in their own so-called peacekeepers or some, whatever forces to help out Kiev. But there's a problem there, because the Russians have said we won't accept any British, French, or NATO member states' forces, whether they come under a NATO flag or not on a NATO flag. So the Russians have said no, and the Americans have said we're not going to provide you with any support. So even if there's a lot of big talk from Keir Starmer and Macron that we're going to put in our forces, ultimately, there's no one who's going to protect them. So it's hard to see what really that they can do. I mean, and they also have very limited persuasive powers with Trump. I mean, I think they think that maybe they can fly into Washington and try to worm their way in, flatter him. That's what they think. That's how you deal with Trump: flatter him, be sycophantic, and maybe Trump will come around and start sounding a lot more like Biden than now. But I don't think that's going to work. So the only thing they can do is ultimately, if they go absolutely crazy and do something really stupid, it's not impossible. And the British and French, send in their own forces, or maybe the Canadians send in some forces. But that just seems like a completely ridiculous and doomed enterprise.
It would be war, wouldn't it, George? It would be the Russians would treat it as an act of war.
I would think that they will treat it as an act of war, and they won't be able to do much about it because they won't be able to invoke Article 5, and they won't be able to ask America for any kind of assistance because the Americans have already said, we're not going to do anything to assist you if you send in your forces. So, it's an enterprise doomed to fail. But I mean, as you were saying about Keir Starmer, I don't know what he's thinking. I really, it doesn't seem to make any kind of sense at all, any more than the things Macron has said about sending in forces into Ukraine. And he started talking about this a year ago. It never really made any sense then, but they just wedded to this idea that somehow Ukraine is some vital national interest of theirs, even though they've never been able to explain in what way anything in Ukraine is a vital interest to either Britain or to France.
So what does it all mean for the end of the war? If you were a betting man, George, can Trump and Putin, as it were, bilaterally bring this war to an end, in your view?
I think that they can bring it to some kind of a conclusion. Basically, I think it would have to be a ceasefire along the current lines of contact, combined with some sanctions relief for Russia, combined with maybe some European Security Conference along the lines of Helsinki. I think that's more doubtful, but combined maybe with some economic partnerships agreements with the United States. The problem for Russia is they've had bad experiences with coming to agreements with the West. Trump isn't going to be there forever. Who knows who comes after him? If it's J.D. Vance, then that's fine. Then I think the agreement would hold. If it's somebody else, then, we're going to be along the same cycle that the West turns around and just reneges on all the commitments it's made. If I were a betting man, I think it is going to come to an end reasonably soon.
Kash Patel has been confirmed. A lot of people upset about this guy becoming the next FBI director. I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. A lot of people that have their hands in the cookie jar are very upset about this guy getting in. I love it. It's really funny to see what's been going on with a lot of these people in government just getting busted for all kinds of corruption. They don't like it, and they're trying real hard. It's been kind of crazy to see the left quadruple down on everything that lost them the election in a landslide. All three levels of government gone for them, pretty much sitting back and wishing that they could keep doing things, but they can't. And now the hatchet and the chainsaw have come out, and they're not happy about it. Well, there's another group of people that are going to be very upset, and that's some people that are on some certain lists. They're not happy about it. We are apparently days away from getting the famous list released. And I'm very happy about that. I can't wait to see who's on that document. And I'm sure many of you are excited to see the names on that list. I wonder if that's why you're seeing a lot of them come out saying, let's have goodwill, good faith. It's, you know, going to congratulate the winner, like Tom Hanks did. Or not Tom Hanks, George Clooney did the other day. Of course, we saw Tom Hanks come out and go after MAGA again. I wonder, Tom Hanks, why you live over in Greece now. About that Greece property, right? Isn't that where he's at now? Ellen DeGeneres moving to UK. I wonder whose names are on that list. I'm very excited to see it. Apparently, it's on Pam Bondi's desk right now. Let's take a listen.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that. I'm reviewing JFK files, MLK files. That's all in the process of being reviewed because that was done at the directive of the president from all of these agencies.
So have you seen anything that you said, oh my?
So, by the way, it's not just good old Jeff's list. Apparently, Puffy's is right around the corner as well. We already know LeBron James attended many of those parties, famously said, ain't no party like a Diddy party. I want all of these people exposed. I want to know who all of them are. And I think we're going to find out real soon. And it's going to be a bad day when we find out officially whose names are on that list. I've just been enjoying the hell out of this ever since Trump got in, man. It has been a wild ride, hasn't it? Has it not been a great ride of wins? Non-stop wins, left and right. I love it. By the way, watch this video of Trump. He is not messing around. I gotta say, man, I have missed this so much. After 4 years of Biden, this has been fantastic. Here he is talking to the governor of Maine, who's very pissed as she vows to go to court. Listen to this. This is funny.
Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Are you not going to comply with it? Well, we are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So
yeah,
you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding. Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics. Every state has a responsibility to comply.
I love it. No F's given, man. I think this is I'm loving this. TikTok still having a meltdown, by the way. You literally have people calling for Trump to be Minecraft. I don't know how is this okay? You shouldn't be allowed to say things like this, but apparently it's all right. You have these radical teachers. Look at this teacher. Look how dumb these people sound. Listen to this.
Hi, my name is Kirsten, and I'm marching for our democracy.
Yeah, so what has Donald Trump done that threatens democracy, you think?
Everything. I mean, he's going against the LGBTQ plus community, which is what I'm a part of. He's going against my immigrant neighbors. He's going against the other teachers and like our safety in the schools, everything.
So tell me what rights you think have been threatened.
My rights to do this.
Who's taking away your right to protest? Aren't you doing it right now? Aren't you doing it right now? Who's stopping you? So how is your right to protest being taken away? The only thing anyone has a problem with is when you go around and loot and burn things down. That's a little extreme. That's not going to be allowed. But just marching, what you're doing right, no one's stopping you from doing this. Who stopped you? You're doing it right now, you moron.
My voting rights.
Who took away your voting rights? Nobody's rights, unless you're from another country here illegally. Yeah, you shouldn't be voting. Nobody wants an illegal voting. If you're not from here, you shouldn't be allowed to vote.
my rights to protect the people as a teacher. Like if ICE comes into my school, I'm not giving my kids up. I think our rights to have a full democracy.
What?
So you're a teacher?
I'm a teacher. Yep.
And
please stop being a teacher. I don't know, it's homeschooling is the way to go right now. This is the biggest problem with our education system. It's like that meme. If you've ever seen it, it's really funny. It's like basically making fun of the education system. It's like, I didn't learn math or long division in school. Well, what did you learn? Men have penis or women have penises. It's like Austin Powers doing that weird face. Like our education sucks right now. It's probably the teachers.
You said your rights to do this, right to protest?
Yeah. Right.
That have been threatened?
Speech, freedom of speech. He's trying to go after the.
No one's. What are you? Is anyone hauling you away right now? Freedom of speech isn't going anywhere. In fact, it's being fought for right now. If anybody wanted to take freedom of speech away, it was you.
The First Amendment, and that's just not it. That's just not it.
How so? How did he go after the First Amendment?
That's part of Project 2025. He doesn't want us to be able to.
Isn't even a part of his thing. They're still running with that shit.
To do things like this. Okay. And
you remember he was kicked off social media platforms. Don't you think he has sympathy towards being banned?
No.
Oh, but what about free speech? What about free speech, huh? Oh, but yeah, ban his free speech. You see? Hypocrites.
No? I don't think he has sympathy for anything. Yeah, I don't think he has sympathy. I think he's a psychopath. I think he doesn't have sympathy for.
I think you're the psychopath. Like this person saying, like rooting for the cartel. Listen to this.
Oh, we might be saved by like the most unexpected group of people. Do you know who Trump's tried to?
This one might be hard to hear. But she basically is rooting for the cartels. You kidding me? Do you know what they do to people? People like live in a box. I'm telling you, just wild stuff. But anyway, that's pretty much it. List is coming. No Fs are being given.
COVID. Follow me.